So here I am with my old buddy Matt Maruca. What's up, dog?
Nothing much, man. Glad to be back.
Yeah, glad to be back.
At it.
Back in black. Hit the sack. Been too long. I'm glad to be back. So
speaking of which, playing music. So I just was hanging out with a friend, like I told you. I left. I was like, what am I going to do? I walked down the street into the square, Piccadilly Circus, like central London. There was a girl singing amazingly. Amazing guitar, and it was raining too. So she was about to leave. I said, hey, where are you from? How's it going? And she said, do you play? Or actually, I told her I play. And so she said, do you want to do a duet? So she said, do you know Shallow, the song from The Star Is Born, the super popular one with Lady Gaga and the other dude? And literally, I'm in the center of London with like 30 people around filming us, just like playing the guitar.
Did you know
doing
the song?
A duet. Yeah, I knew it. It was pretty epic.
No way.
Yeah, it was just total serendipity.
But that's
it was
sick.
pretty fun. I don't have much experience with like public playing, but it worked out.
Well, you have a knack, because I remember when we were in Austin last at Barton Springs Pool, and you had your little Martin backpack guitar.
Always with me.
And then you had this app on your phone, and you're like busting out Beatles songs, Nirvana songs, just whatever. I'm like, how the fuck do you do that? Like, I can't keep a melody. I can play. I probably am like way better at guitar than you, but I can't really like sing and play songs. Like, I don't, the lyrics. I don't. It's just difficult. Anyway, good for you. It sounds like an amazing moment. I just totally said I was a better guitar player than you without any knowledge of that being a fact. But
I think you're probably
But
right.
I had to claim
I know
something.
you played.
I mean, I have been playing for 22 years, so
I think you
guess
probably got me there.
I've been playing guitar longer than you've been alive by, 2 years?
Yeah.
So if I'm not better, I must really suck. So anyway, Matt's not been on the show since our first meeting. Since our first meeting in New York City. And, he comes up to me after an event that I spoke at Cat Beauty in the West Village.
Yep.
And he drove all the way up from Philly. He was 18, and he was a listener to the show at that time, which means I would have only had the show about a year at that point. Comes up to me afterward and is like, hey, man, that was a cool talk. I'm Matt. He had a couple of his cronies with him. He's like, I want to be on your podcast. I was like, okay, that's forward, but all right, what do you want to talk about? And he starts busting down his knowledge of EMF, 5G. This is like before anyone knew about 5G even happening before, and also just junk light and blue light and melatonin and circadian rhythm and why we need DHA and seafood and all this rad shit.
Yeah, I was pushing a lawnmower, trying to make money, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. I was set to go to Europe in about 2 weeks, and Luke said, hey, everyone, if you live in New York City, I'm going to be at Cat Beauty in the middle of the Dr. Cruz episode that you were doing. It was an advertisement, and I was like, I'm going to go ask Luke if I can be on his podcast. And so in the same night, Luke asked before anything, just at the end, Buddy and I, Brian, my friend, we were both wearing the tinted lenses, and I tried to have Luke get connected with, with the company that does the tinting, but it was such a pain that I just said, you know what, let me do it myself. And so that was arranged. And then at the end of our street conversation, where the founder of Four Sigmatic happened to just walk by, and I was
Taro
like,
came by.
I was like, what? Because I hadn't met anyone in the space practically. And then he's like this guy who's on Tim Ferriss's show. I was like, oh my gosh, this is insane. So yeah, that's when I asked. And so in the same night, I got the podcast that practically launched the business, and the question that launched the business. The podcast that launched my personal brand more, because you wouldn't believe how many people came up to me at this event and said, dude, I heard your podcast with Luke, like everyone.
Oh, so, no way. That's awesome.
So,
well,
that's how I remember it.
It speaks to your, self-confidence, or else just biting the bullet to, approach someone you don't know and pitch yourself like that. And it also speaks to perhaps my intuition, knowing like, oh, there's something special about this guy. I was going to say this kid, but you're a man, you're a grown-ass man, And I knew there was just something, you had this charisma about you, and you were also very knowledgeable, especially for your age. You were busting down some of the physics and the science of all of this stuff that I couldn't even begin to explain. So, yeah, and then we did that episode, and you came up to my hotel. I was staying at the Standard. And
upgraded to the Empire Suite, and $1,500 a night.
Yeah, I think it was $2,500. I didn't pay that, trust me. But what had happened was I had a bunch of recordings scheduled. I was out there for the Whitma Live event, and I was staying in a nice room at the Standard, not the smallest one, but a medium one. And I was happy with it. It was chill. It overlooked the river there, and it was nice. But I was about to record. I had all my shit set up. I forget who it was. Maybe Saudi Simone, I think it might have been. And the fucking AC broke in my room. And I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. It was hot as shit. Called the front desk, like, all right, well, we can't fix it, so we'll move you to another room. And they moved me into the Empire Suite. And I walk in, it's literally like Scarface's lair. It's maybe like as big as my LA apartment. It's probably like 1,500 square feet or something. Big. Massive 1 bedroom. There's a den. There's huge. I mean, it's
and
just
the couch where I slept because it was so late.
Yeah,
By the time we were done, I couldn't drive 2 hours home without dying.
So anyway, we sit down and record with no plan, which is what we're about to do right now, which is something I rarely do because I just, there's things I want to cover when I'm familiar with someone's work. So we sit down and we have like, what was it, 2.5 hour conversation? And this episode obviously exists.
3.
You guys can go back and listen.
Yeah.
Was it 3 hours?
Yeah.
So
that was the longest too.
That was my longest episode ever. And so we did that. And dude, we talked about I remember one funny point. We talked about Matt's journey, so we're not going to cover that today, which is like his story, how he overcame all these health issues and how he was so tweaked as a kid and he was all fucked up and he fixed it with diet and lifestyle. But then we just started going to all these weird areas, and I remember one question I asked you, I was like, because I was interested at the time, I think. I said, so what do you think, Matt, about this idea of preserving your chi by not ejaculating?
Yeah.
Right? And
I think the crowd liked that one.
Yeah, it was really funny. And I wasn't trying to even be cheeky. I was just like, I was curious if you actually knew anything about it because you were so knowledgeable. And you're like, well, Luke, to be honest, I'm only 18, so I'm not really like having sex that much yet where that's a problem or something. It was hilarious.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, homie's like just starting to get laid. So like the idea of, working with the energies and semen retention is not top priority at this moment in his life.
I have heard about that idea a lot more in the last few weeks.
Really?
Yeah. It's come across in a few different areas. One from a Qigong master in Norway who talks about, masturbation as an absolute unnecessary. One there. Then an Ayurvedic doctor I met in Bali who will be someone I'm very interested to speak more about on this episode because of how it relates to the stuff we talked about last time. But same thing, he said, masturbation, no go, absolutely not. But sex with a woman, it's okay, he said, a couple times a month because at least you're getting some of their energy, especially if you're practicing Tantra. Then I've come across 2 separate people.
Wait, twice a month? Hell no.
A couple times a month. That's kind of what he was saying for optimal function of the chi
okay.
because the semen is the most refined, but that doesn't mean not having sex. It just means ejaculating.
That means not busting. Okay.
So you can if you practice, you can actually have orgasms, multiple orgasms, full body, brain, mind, everything. I'm not at that level yet.
That's a Bigfoot story, my friend. No, it's not.
So?
No.
Yeah.
I've interviewed guys and they're like, "Oh, I could teach you how to do it." I'm like, "Okay." I mean, I'm sure men have achieved that.
Teach you how to do this.
Well, that could get awkward, I guess, unless you're oriented that way.
Yeah, of course.
No, but I'm just like, it sounds good in theory, but then when you're in the moment, it's like, really? Like,
really?
Why do you want to hold it back? But anyway, so.
Yeah, so there seems to be some
there
mounting amount because it's the most refined. So we consume food, and then it goes into our blood, and it makes blood, and then eventually muscle, then eventually connective tissue, then bone, then brain, then liver, and then it's this whole process. And the most refined fluid in the entire body is semen. So it's the most light dense of all of our fluids. And so the theory is that by keeping it in, we're keeping more of that energy and we can channel it upwards better. So it's apparently, again, I'm definitely going to get into this eventually, but you could have much more pleasurable orgasms by not ejaculating and be healthier and live longer. And apparently one person I met who is a master astrologer I just spent a couple days with in Croatia, it was super random. It's kind of funky story, but I was on a nude beach in Croatia just chilling out. This dude walks by.
Nads?
Exactly. Dude walks by, and personally, I'm not oriented that way. However, the guy looked friendly, and I just waved, said, "What's up?" He looked like a Californian or a traveling wandering hobo, but turns out he's a Californian. There's actually a cove in Laguna Beach named after him unofficially called Evo Cove, because it's the nudist cove in Laguna Beach that he's friends with city council. They might even name it officially after him, Evo Cove, Laguna Beach, California. So very interesting deal. But he told me all this stuff, and he told me about how, just meeting in Croatia, random spot. He's looking to build a community there, like, naturist is the term, because it's not nudist, it's naturist. It's what we're designed to be. But he said over time, keeping that semen in also it turns into some sort of natural cologne, natural like perfume. The scent becomes more attractive. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. You become more like a magnet. It's pretty interesting.
Interesting. So, you become a pee magnet for by creating these crazy pheromones. Interesting concept. Yeah. Well, what I learned a couple days ago from John Gray, it was really interesting. He went into this. I mean, he talks about relationships and sex. That's his career. But I was interviewing about spirituality and meditation, which is how he got his start. And at the very end of a 2.5 hour show, he just randomly starts going into this particular topic. And from his research into hormones and nutrition, he said that when you ejaculate, you lose, I forget what he said. I'd have to, we'll listen back to it. And I don't know if this will come out before the new John Gray episode that I just did, but it had to do with losing all your zinc. And your zinc is highly concentrated in your baby batter. And when you let it out and waste it, it takes you like 2 days to replenish that one shot in your zinc. And your zinc is essential for producing certain neurotransmitters of dopamine or whatever it was. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to get the chemistry wrong, but he's like, oh yeah, you do not want to be like watching porn, having orgasms more than X amount of times a week, because you're tanking your zinc, and that has a cascade effect on your mood and your drive. And you know what it was? I think your zinc builds your testosterone. I think that might have been what it was. And he's like, so guys with low T, it's usually because they've jizzed too much early in life, and especially guys that had a good sizable porn habit, because on the unnatural stimulation of porn, I mean, most guys could probably like rack out 3 or 4 times a day or more in some cases,
Yeah, and Balarama, so the doctor I met, who I mentioned this to you off air, but he's a student of one of the students of Yogananda, the author of the Autobiography of a Yogi.
Sure.
And so for anyone who happens to be in Russia or worldwide who's interested in Ayurveda, Balarama, with all A's, Stanislav, he's Russian, but learned from the Ayurvedic tradition. Really amazing, amazing guy. He said it's 7 weeks for that chi that's been expended to sort of fully regenerate.
Damn.
So.
Well, shit, we've come a long way in 2 years, dude. In many ways. So let's talk about some of the other ways. So anyway, if you want to hear Maddie's story and a much shorter conversation about that particular topic, go back to that episode. I don't remember the number, but the title is Extreme Biohacking Millennial Edition.
Yeah.
You can go back and search my feed, because it was
clickbait.
I know. I've often thought, was that episode number 1 for so long because it had a sticky title? Or was it that it was so good that people shared it a lot and it kind of went viral? It was probably a combination of both.
We were at dinner with Neil in LA, and he said, "Oh, it must have been the title."
He did?
Yeah, because he was like, even more downloaded than mine. He's like, "Oh, it must have been the title."
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He wasn't even in the top 20. I don't think. God bless Neil. I love you, buddy. If you ever hear this, no, Neil is actually one of my favorite guests. But what's weird about my podcast is, Neil, I think he's just brilliant, and he's one of my literary heroes, and I've learned so much from his books, and he's just a great friend and a cool guy. Neil Strauss, we're talking about, who's been on the show a couple times now. His last one was on parenting. But it's also nice to get people on that have New York Times best-selling books. I think he has 9 of them or something. And I've had some other really famous people on. What's really weird, though, is that when it comes to downloads, which is how you measure your metric of success as a podcaster, is the number of downloads each episode gets, my highest downloads aren't the most famous people at all. I remember in the beginning I had Dave Asprey on my show, who's like one of the, he's the godfather of biohacking and all this, and very knowledgeable guy, but he's not even, I don't think I don't know where his rating is, but it's one of my least popular shows.
Yeah, well,
and he's super famous, so it's weird. It's not an indicator of what's going to make a hit episode.
Totally. I think it's something about novelty might be more relevant, and that's why these ideas, novelty that can be understood and applied. That's like my theory, because that would make sense why what I was talking about did so well, because it was totally novel, although Jack had spoken about it, Dr. Cruz, but plus in a way that could be understood and applied. That's where I think I kind of excelled in the last recording. And so another thing that came from the episode, as you very well know, was that it landed me with basically a place in LA and a car to drive around from a mutual friend of ours. Pretty interesting. So someone just was interested in kind of getting me hooked up in the LA community and has that influence and ability to do so, just totally sent me on my way out there. It was pretty unexpected, but that was one of the massive benefits of just one podcast episode. So it goes really far. Anyhow, so yeah.
So what happened after that? So you come on the show, it comes out, which took a while for it to come out.
6 months or so. You had canned a lot of them ahead of time at that point.
You know why too? Especially because that particular trip in New York, I think I recorded like 14 episodes. Yeah. That alone is 14 weeks worth, and I already had a bunch in the can.
Exactly.
So after you left New York, give us like a fast version of like kind of what's transpired since that first episode.
Really good question. So I was already planning to go to Europe in about a month from that recording. I had booked my flights, or a month from the time I asked you. And so since that recording, in the end, when I asked you the question, it was the end of August when you did the Cat Beauty 2017. I started the business in my garage with someone tinting glasses. We never talked about the business because it didn't exist the last time we recorded. So basically the business, Raw Optics, began in my garage tinting your glasses before the episode actually. But then, so it had started by the time we recorded a month later, but it was in its infancy. People were sending me their frames to tint the lenses, and I had my little brother's friend tinting the glasses. Now, he was well trained, but when we had the measuring devices to make sure every pair met the specs, and in a way, someone like that, because they're good at listening and taking orders, and my mom was overseeing the whole thing, it was exceptional. And we stayed like that for a few months when it was still really small. Eventually, we moved into a professional optical lab to have everything produced, and we've been upgrading since then. But after we recorded, like 3 or 4 days later, I flew to Europe. So I went around Europe. I met with people, some of the most, let's say, interesting of which were these Qigong practitioners in Norway, one of whom was very young, in late 20s, early 30s, teaching basically about Qigong. And he had listened to Ben Greenfield, then learned about Dr. Kruse, and then wanted to connect with me to maybe connect with Dr. Kruse and so on. So I went to Norway, hung out with him, met his Qigong master, and they started telling me about this sort of energetic meditation, which, to my amazement, let's say, was revealed to me 2 years later almost, when I was just in Bali with this Ayurvedic doctor and a protocol he gave to me. And then Dr. Barry Morgellon, same energetic meditation. So there's all these meditations out there, but 3 individual times I've been directed to the same type of almost like source energy, Qigong type meditation. One is prana, Ayurvedic style, Qigong, Chinese, and then the source energy practice from Dr. Barry. But they all involve sitting still or standing or laying down, and basically using breath and visualizing bright white light and allowing it to essentially expand to different areas. Dr. Barry, in the audio thing I did at his booth at the event, because he was here, it focused on the light going through the heart and then eventually coming up and up. But the culmination of even the first one I learned in Norway was focusing on this energy up here around the aura. And I haven't quite figured out what that really is doing, but I think, and this is step 8 of the light diet, we'll get into the sort of linear progression of those, but step 8 of the light diet is cultivate your inner light, because we have this light inside of us. One of the things I knew before we did the last interview, although I don't know if I mentioned it, is that the body is a being of light. And there were these researchers in the early 1900s studying cells, trying to figure out how does life really work. And they found that the thing that makes cells divide, because that's just a pretty important process. If you think about a living organism, your cells die and they need to keep dividing and so on. The stimulus is a release of UV light. So basically our cells emit this ultraviolet light frequencies, and they basically trigger mitosis and cell division. So this, to me, I have to say, was very, very, very fascinating, because it implied that UV light, which people think causes skin cancer, is actually a foundational piece of our biologic function. So the thing that people says causes skin cancer is the same thing that our cells are using to signal for division. So think about that for a second. Does it really cause cancer if it's so foundational that our cells emit it every time they got to divide? And our cells that are stressed, for example, when a cell, like a human cell, our building block, is healthy, it doesn't leak a lot of light, it keeps it in. When it's stressed, it leaks a ton of light. And then when we die, I mentioned this story at dinner last night, we leak out pretty much all of our light. And they measure this in living organisms. When a living organism is dead, it loses the ability to keep that light in, and it all leaks out. So your talk, which I just glanced on the screen just by chance before I gave my talk, which gave me the perfect ending for my talk, was you are not a soul. You do not have a soul. You are a soul. That was your title, right?
Yeah.
For your talk at this event.
Yeah,
So
it was one of the slides, yeah.
okay, so one of the slides. And so it turns out, factually, biophysically, our cells are composed of ultraviolet light. They use it to signal. They keep it in. When we die, we leak it out. It's just like in the Bible. When we die, the soul leaves the body. People say, I can see the light, like all the light's leaking out of their cells, and they're basically reconnecting to the eternal universe. So our soul is light, just like all the ancient traditions have said. And it's been biophysically proven in a book called, for those fascinated, it's a textbook, Light Shaping Life, Biophotons in Biology and Medicine. Fascinating book, compilation of all this research. So that interested me enough way back, even before we did our interview. We didn't touch too much on this spiritual stuff, but to think and realize, like, if you sit and you just feel, you can just feel, that's energy that you're feeling, movement of nerves and everything. And so if you channel that energy just through your consciousness, and you channel it so that it's kind of in one particular spot around the top level, maybe, just maybe, it's leading to increased activation of certain parts of the brain that allow us to be more connected to the universe, like the pineal gland. And, there's other people who understand the mechanisms way better than I do. But to me, this was one of the really, really fascinating things that I learned about just from that initial meeting. So basically, I was going around Europe. I was just meeting with different people, sort of trying to implement the light diet, growing my business from my computer. Came back, went to Mexico, visited Dr. Cruz more, learned more, built up my business. And at one point, I was feeling really lonely. I was like, I've been doing this now. All my friends are in college or traveling their gap year. I'm working on my business. I'm at home in Philly. It's winter. It's cold. It's dark. I want to be around people. That's what I thought was the answer to the way I was feeling. I went to UC Berkeley, and I went to these other schools in Colorado just to see, would college be like an interesting thing to do, for example? Would I actually benefit from it? And I saw in that experience that all the kids in these universities are living really, really unhealthy lifestyles, like staying up late, getting pissed drunk. Everyone's on their phones all the time. People, they get so drunk even on weeknights constantly, probably because they're so depressed, their hormones are so messed up. So it was more validation of what I had been learning about the stuff we discussed. In colleges, it's a major issue. The number of kids in the average building, this is the craziest part, who are addicted to video gaming. Literally all they do is video game, maybe a little bit of time on their work. They go to their classes. They're literally like zombies. They're video gaming all night long. Even the roommate of the kid I was visiting and crashing on his floor. So there's this kid gaming with his headset on all night long. Dude, it's insane, an epidemic that's happening.
Low dopamine.
Low dopamine, man, blue light toxicity, mitochondrial dysfunction, poor sleep. It's a mess. And that's a huge issue that's going on in our society. Parents, I heard some women on the street talking oh yeah, my son's into gaming. The other one's oh yeah, my son's into gaming. Well, it's kind of cool. They meet people, and they connect, and they're really good friends. And sure, if people are meeting people and connecting, great, but the effects of this, as we discussed last time, are really harmful. Blue light on the mitochondria is just very rough. As Wunsch probably talked about, increased free radical generation just from the light hitting our eyes and our skin leads to more mutation of the mitochondrial DNA. This small amount of genes the mitochondria have to regulate energy generation leads to basically lowered energy generation, which means that it's kind of like Dr. Boros, Dr. Q gave a great analogy with deuterium, for example. I think it was in your episode, where, for example, if your energy generation, let's just say the government had 5% reduction in income from taxes, or 10% reduction in income from taxes, they're going to have to lay a lot of people off and cut a lot of programs, because that little chunk of energy is pretty substantial. So imagine in a human organism, you need 100 units of energy to carry out everything optimally, and you reduce it just by 5%, 10%, because of destroying the mitochondrial function. I mean, I would say that pretty much all of us, because how we're living, myself included, are at a much lower level than we could be. But, so this is kind of stuff that I saw since we interviewed. I saw the validation of the health effects of blue light. These kids are often depressed. Lots of students, worldwide are depressed. In fact, since we last recorded, the number one killer of teenagers used to be car crashes. Now it's suicide.
That's crazy, dude.
Yeah, not really a good thing. And so it's like, people are, the thing that actually...
You know what fucking pisses me off is, I'm sorry to interrupt. We'll continue on with the story, is, okay, this is a very delicate subject. Should I say this or not? Probably not, but I'm going to say it. It's a very delicate subject. Let me just say, I think it's quite obviously extremely tragic when people go out and shoot other people. The thing that makes that happen more is manyfold, one of which being the media giving attention to it and sensationalizing it, which I think is all about taking away the Second Amendment ultimately. But what no one's really talking about is the suicide epidemic and the opioid crisis, both of those. And not just the suicide epidemic, but the suicide epidemic amongst young people. Not just the fact that it's happening, but why, what's at the root of it, right?
People are dying.
Yeah, the amount of people committing suicide as compared to people, victims, sadly, of course, obviously, we don't want this to happen, of mass shootings. But I think those mass shootings and the root of the suicide are all the same problem.
And the heroin and opiate.
Yeah, and the opiates. Yeah, it's all the same problem. And so, anyway, I have my theories. It's your interview.
Dude.
Kind of. It's a conversation.
It's your interview.
This one's kind of a conversation more than an interview, but we really need to look at the low dopamine states and what's dysregulating
it's unbelievable.
The neurotransmitters. I'm
so glad you bring this up.
Yeah, the neurotransmitters and the hormones in the endocrine system.
Dude, it's
fluoride in the water.
Unbelievable.
All these things that used to be considered, like the fluoride in the water used to be like a fringe conspiracy theory to most people, and now even mainstream fake news media even admits that it's causes neurological problems. And pregnant women that drink fluoridated water, which, by the way, pregnant women, if you drink drinks from Starbucks, if you have your kombucha, pretty much anything you drink that's made out of water, unless it's been reverse osmosis or some very aggressive filtration, you're drinking fluoridated water probably. And you're compromising the IQ, literally the IQ of your baby. Mm-hmm. So these pollutants and the light pollutant and the EMF pollution moving into 5G, I personally think that is the root of all of these mental disorders that culminate in suicide, opiate addiction, and in some cases, unfortunately, mass shootings. It's not caused by guns, okay? Just like, what are we going to, okay, everyone's committing suicide, slitting their wrists. Let's outlaw razor blades. What the fuck? How about let's look at why kids are so driven through trauma and pain that they don't want to be here anymore. So anyway, that's my soapbox tangent. I probably just lost a bunch of listeners, but I fundamentally believe in the Constitution, and I believe in telling the truth, and the media does not tell the truth about what the real issues are. If you want to look at statistically what's killing the most people, it's not mass shootings. It's suicide. It's the opiate crisis.
3 million people die every year in the United States. 2/3 are caused by chronic diseases, all of which are preventable, to be honest. Think about that. Doesn't mean that those people aren't going to die anyway, but do they have to die from a painful, suffering, chronic disease, which we discussed on the last episode.
This conversation just got really dark.
Doctor.
One thing we're talking about holding your jizz in for longevity. Next thing it's like, whoa. But hey, anyway.
Hey, I don't want to be negative because for me, I've almost closed myself off from feeling emotions about these subjects because if I did, I would feel, I think, very upset a lot of the time at what's happening. Connecting back in the conversation I just had with this friend who I just had lunch with. She asked about my story. I got into how I was really pretty depressed when I was 14, 15. Basically, I had no reservations with her. I would eat. I was trying to fix my diet with stricter, my health with stricter and stricter diets. I got to a point where I was on the GAPS diet, the gut and psychology syndrome, bone broth, well-cooked meat, and well-cooked vegetables only, mega gut healing, and I still felt terrible. I had mad carb cravings even after a couple of weeks on the diet. I didn't have energy, so something clearly was wrong where we discussed this, my engines weren't working optimally, so I couldn't burn that fat for fuel because my engines were almost in sort of a cancerous transition, which is where, there's the Warburg shift where cancerous or precancerous cells are more consuming carbs and sugars. That's where I was at, and that wasn't affected by the food that I was consuming, the fuel that was going in. And the analogy that's been refined over the last few years since we spoke is that the mitochondria, the engines that fuel the body, that allow us to function, that allowed us to go from being a single-celled organisms to being able to expand into super complex organisms, the engines that fueled that and still fuel our complexity each second are the mitochondria. So, for example, stop breathing as a test, dead in 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes, because the mitochondria power everything, and they use oxygen to power plus hydrogen from our food. And the issue is, though, that if we have mitochondrial damage, for example, that's like having an engine in a car where the spark plugs, which are part of the ignition system. Do you know about engines?
No.
So in a car engine,
I've never touched one.
Totally fine. So there's an engine. People can look up a diagram. There's an engine, and there's these things called spark plugs that are timed by the ignition system, and they basically use a sort of spark to ignite the fuel in the chamber, which causes the pistons to fire, and the piston movement basically spins the wheel, which gets the car moving. Essentially, that's a simplified version. But so if in that car there were a problem in the ignition system, in the spark plugs that are allowing the pistons to fire and sync and in time, what would happen if we put in premium fuel instead of regular fuel, if the spark plugs in the ignition system are fucked up? It isn't going to fix, obviously, it isn't going to fix the broken ignition system. But so the whole idea, the whole reason why the diet focus is essentially absurd for curing the modern diseases we're having, is because we're trying to fix an issue in our body which is not caused by the fuel with the better fuel. And so it can definitely alleviate the symptoms, but still people say food is solving the root cause. It is not solving the root cause. Absolutely not. In that engine, put in premium gas, the car is still going to have, the pistons are going to misfire, the engine's going to putter or sputter, whatever the term is. The car it's not going to be able to accelerate, and there's going to be a whole bunch of problems, essentially. So the same thing in the body. Like, if you try to fix that broken engine with the broken spark plugs, broken ignition system with fuel additives or with premium fuel, it's not going to fix the broken spark plugs, the broken ignition system, which is damaging the ability to burn all that good fuel that's going in. Same thing in the mitochondria that power our whole organism, which if they don't work, we die, and if their function declines, we have diseases. There's issues in the proteins and the systems that are channeling all the energy through them, like the fuel coming in, but it isn't the fuel that's causing the problem. Again, shitty fuel isn't optimal, obviously, and better fuel is better. But if the issue's in the ignition system, in the spark plugs of our mitochondria, then fuel isn't going to fix it. And you know this because you talked with the Wunsch and Jack. The thing that controls our ignition system in our cells is light. It's the full spectrum of sunlight. So, for example, and it doesn't just control the mitochondria, which Dr. Doug Wallace, do you remember? We talked about Dr. Wallace?
You've talked about him a lot, yeah. When am I going to get to interview his ass?
Dude, you'd be the first podcaster ever to interview him that I'm aware of, and it would be legendary.
Where's he based, in Philly?
Philly, yeah. So
too cold.
we'll make something happen.
I've never been there, but
Dr.
Anyway,
Wallace.
Sorry, go on.
He was studying rare mitochondrial diseases, people with these issues that were super rare, and then was wondering all these diseases that they're trying to figure out that have been exploding just during his career. The last 40 years, 50 years, he's been doing research. Cancer, obesity, diabetes, Alzheimer's, autoimmune disease, infertility, depression, anxiety, all of the chronic diseases that they've been trying to blame on the genes, and say, oh, it's genetic. Just like they were saying, oh, headaches, gut issues, allergies, the things you have, that's genetic. You can't fix it. That's what medicine has been trying to do. And then, oh, the only thing you can do is use a drug because it's in your genes. You can't fix it, right? He's realized that that's just a complete myth. And then in all those diseases, it's the mitochondria that aren't working well. And so, again, we're trying to fix it with drugs. Definitely not working, obviously. Trying to fix it with food, and it works for some people. But, maybe have you interviewed any carnivore diet people yet?
Actually, I've got Michaela Peterson on the books at some point here in the near future.
Keep in mind that someone who does a carnivore diet, right, their body is destroyed to the extent where if they have one single piece of a spice or a plant or a fruit, anything that isn't beef, salt, and water, they feel like shit. They feel trash. They feel poisoned. And people have been eating that food for the last thousands of years, plant food. Doesn't mean it's our optimal diet. I'm not saying that. But so carnivore diet people are saying, oh, eat the carnivore diet because plants are all bad for us and we're not designed to be eating them. And, it's super suboptimal. So, yeah, I actually kind of get on with that. Like, I think we're better off as seafood eaters or meat eaters or, at least sort of mixed. But is someone really cured of their diseases if the only thing they can eat is beef, water, and salt, like Michaela Peterson? And then if she eats anything besides beef, water, and salt, her immune system goes so crazy that her joints literally start disintegrating and attacking themselves. So she needed all these replacements. I wouldn't consider that cured. Doesn't mean that it doesn't work and have the benefit, because it obviously is. She looks great. She seems healthy. She has great energy. Seems like a nice girl. I've chatted with her briefly about the light diet. But there's no cure that's going on in that case, because this would be essentially the immune system's messed up because the mitochondria in the immune system are messed up because of a toxic, disconnected lifestyle, which is primarily related to altered light spectrum, because light is what drives the ignition system, the function of those mitochondria. So having sunlight makes it work. Having too much blue light messes it up, and having too much EMF also messes it up. So anyone who's going to listen to carnivore diet stuff should definitely be aware that yes, it might be an optimal diet, but if you are reacting and having horrible symptoms anytime you eat something that isn't meat, then that means that there's probably an issue in your immune system. And yes, you might eliminate the symptoms by removing all beef, and you might feel really good, and you can do that the rest of your life. And I do believe that is a more optimal human diet, yes. But you shouldn't necessarily not be able to eat a plant ever again. There's something off there.
Or ice cream, for God's sake.
Well, there you go. Exactly. There is, contrary to what the desire is, there is a lot of pleasure in eating a wide variety of food. Doesn't mean it's completely optimal. But again, the body, here's the cool part about the light diet is that people have been able to live, like super centenarians, the people who live the longest, smoke cigarettes and drink alcohol. So not that we should be doing these things. Obviously, I know your background, that wouldn't be a good idea. But how's that possible? People just, oh, that's an anomaly, just disregard it. But it's actually not really an anomaly. It's pretty consistent. And there's tons of people in all kinds of regions have been eating grains. You just had paleo people you're interviewing here. They've been eating grains for thousands of years. And there have been super centenarians who have eaten grains. Again, people are like, oh, it's just an anomaly, But really, there's obviously other factors besides food. So in my belief, it is that it's the mitochondrial function that's the main driver. And if you have great mitochondrial function, then you're totally golden and you could eat grains. But the thing is, in the modern world, most people actually don't. Most of us don't. So for me, yeah, I'm not going to eat a ton of grains because my mitochondrial function has been damaged so much in my childhood. Even if I do everything right for 5 years, I might not be able to restore it to where it was when these people were eating grains and, plants plus meat and fish, whatever else, and living really long, healthy lives. So that's sort of the gist.
How does the mitochondrial piece tie into the epidemic of opioids and suicide?
Yeah.
And for that matter, crazy shooters and fucking nuts.
It's likely, from my understanding and research, that in the brain, the mitochondrial dysfunction is tremendously damaged. And Dr. Wallace, as part of his research on mitochondria, and again, I would be epic if you interviewed him, epic. I've been meaning to bring that suggestion about But I was thinking about doing my own podcast, so I actually wanted to be the first one to interview him because I know it's going to be legendary. But just like with the Deuterium guys, I will put it on the record that I referred you to them, and that you can have the honor of being the first.
Thank you.
So the
Thank
world
you,
can
Matt.
get the world can get the interview sooner.
Good
than
looking out.
2 years down the road when I might have a podcast.
You keep protecting eyes, and I'll keep filling ears.
There we go. Perfect. We've got our niche. But so they have found that or at least based on the evidence, very clearly linked that there is a component of mitochondrial dysfunction in the brain in anxiety and depression. So the mitochondria in the brain are specifically afflicted, and that leads to dysfunction of the brain, and so things like anxiety and depression come about. Now, I would be very inclined to also put it more towards what you and Dr. Wunsch may have spoken about, which is light, and how sunlight, just like we evolved to use fuel in the form of chemical fuel to power our reactions. Like, I'm not saying anyone can just live off of light on the light diet. We can use hydrogen and oxygen, which is what we generally do, and that's how we power our existence, essentially. There's sunlight energy stored in the bonds of the hydrogen, and then when it reacts with oxygen in our mitochondria, and we drain and we suck the energy off those hydrogen's electrons, basically, then we have energy and power our life. So, in other words, when life was simpler, it could have maybe just lived off of sunlight or just basic reactions of chemicals from what was around it. But then as life was growing, it became dandy to be able to consume another living organism instead of just inorganic chemicals around us. Because then that organism that we're consuming has spent, like, for example, a banana, that spent a whole season assimilating sunlight. So we have the benefit of being able to get a whole season of sunlight, or in the case of meat, like years worth of assimilating energy essentially into a very compact plate. So that's one of the things that powered more complex evolution. So fuel for a complex organism like us is critical. Food is critical. That's the point. But we have tons of systems. The first that's super obvious and the best example because people know it is vitamin D. Like, you can eat good food all day long, but it doesn't give you the ATP energy that we're making from the food we're eating to do all kinds of certain things. Doesn't give us the frequencies we need to make vitamin D. So, like, we can have, I'm using my hands here, like, on one side of the table, we have food, which powers, like, generally a lot of things, including our consciousness, wakefulness, being alive, and a lot of reactions in the cells, but there's a ton of other things in addition to vitamin D. It's just one of the ones everyone knows that are directly powered by the sun's light. So we have indirect via food and direct via sun. And so because the sun has such a huge spectrum of frequencies, there's like, the body can be like, oh, we're going to use this wavelength, like 293 or 313. I forget, I think it's 293, somewhere around there for vitamin D synthesis. We're going to use that for vitamin D synthesis. And then, 314, we're going to use that for this. And then this we're going to use for that. And so literally, like, we have a whole massive amount of energy in the sun that we could use to do all kinds of biologic functions. And the research from some of the books I've read since we last spoke makes it clear that there's certain enzymes. Their function is increased 500%, so 5 times just by being exposed to certain frequencies of light. Like, the red light people are taking mega advantage of this because other of the frequencies in the infrared side of the spectrum, so this is another less known example, in 660 and 880 nanometers, we have these cytochromes, which are like light-absorbing proteins in the mitochondria, where those electrons are hopping across the chain while the energy is being sucked out of them, the ones that come from the food. And their function is massively improved by light shining onto them. So it's like, it's exactly like I described. There's the fuel going into the car's engine, but there's the spark plugs which are making the pistons fire, and those spark plugs are controlled by the light. So when you're standing in your red light juve, just like with your balls out and just getting the sun on your dick and just having fun and feeling great, there's all these frequencies that are making your engines just like the pistons are, it's just so much better. The best example of this, have you interviewed Sachin Panda? That's a must.
No.
Super mega must. You know Sachin Panda?
No.
Man,
That's a cool
me?
name.
He's the circadian rhythm researcher who's like the bomb. He's in San Diego.
Oh, really?
Absolute must, yeah. 100% must. He's pretty well known now in the sleep field. Basically, I'm surprised you don't know about him. He's huge, big name. So Dr. Wallace, Sachin Panda come from this. Guys, when you hear about those episodes, remember, I told Luke. 'Cause he's going to take credit. He'll forget. Trust me.
Yeah, I'd be like, so based on my research, I found a man named Panda.
So basically what happened here was they're studying. I can't believe you don't know about them.
Ah, dude.
It's fascinating. I'm just giving you a hard time, bro. You know I love
I
you.
sit around doing Kundalini yoga. I'm a hippie. I don't have time to find people.
Sachin Panda is the man. So, and I don't even know him personally, but what they found, he's been studying circadian rhythms like forever. Jack's a big fan of his. Basically what they showed, he's a big proponent of time-restricted eating, so eating within a certain window. So they were wondering, because of the activity of the mitochondria, our engines, and our general metabolism, which the mitochondria are one of the biggest pieces of, controlled by light, because of that activity, which is governed by the circadian rhythm, this ongoing 24-hour cycle that happens within us constantly, no matter what we do, except when we, based on our light exposure triggering it. He's wondering, could eating food at different times of day have different effects? So what they did with mice who are nocturnal, they fed them healthy food when their circadian rhythm dictates that the engines are turning off. And then they fed them shitty food when the circadian rhythm dictates that their engines are turning on. And what would you believe the result was?
I bet they did better with the shitty food at the right time than the good food at the wrong time.
I wish I had a prize for you, because if I did, you would win it. But that's exactly what happened.
How about a pair of raw optics glasses?
Oh, bro, we got you covered. So what happened, literally the mice that were fed shitty food in the time when their engines were like burning through it like bang because they're supposed to be on, they were totally healthy. And the mice that had the healthy food when their engines were like because we're trying to sleep were metabolically damaged, messed up, and blah blah blah. So basically, it implies that all the people who are doing fasting and not eating anything until like late in the evening, they'll fast all day and eat like after 6 or 7 p.m. Sure, there's a huge benefit from fasting all day, but you're also you're like totally basically eliminating some of the benefits. Really, like, it's just poorly used energy. Like, you could just eat one big breakfast and then fast the rest of the day from there, which is actually seemingly harder, but still better, because then you're getting that food and nutrients when the engines are powered and charged, and then you're not disrupting the circadian rhythm. But for someone who's fasting all day, they have so little calories coming in at that point that they probably do a lot better burning through it, and they're going to be healthier overall, because they're just basically, fasting. When you're not eating food, you're burning your fat. And so instead of eating food, again, burning your own fat, that's deuterium depleted fat that we've stored onto ourselves generally, unless we're just always eating sugar and grains. So when we burn that fat, we're making deuterium depleted water in the mitochondria. So it's basically just like being ketogenic all the time, or low deuterium. So that's super beneficial. So those people probably get off a little bit better because they're not eating generally. But where it kills is, like, imagine someone wakes up, they have a light breakfast or whatever breakfast they normally have. They go to, they have a snack, they eat again, lunch, another snack, eat. But then they get back from work and they eat dinner at like 8 p.m. They've already eaten all day, and they're eating again at like 8 p.m. So their engines are trying to stay at burning it, but they're not effectively doing so. So they're just packing on all this weight basically as fat because they just can't burn through it. That's like if I had to give a protocol, like how to gain weight, and I think a lot of people are going to be like, shit, it would be stay up after the sun goes down with artificial lights on you and eat after the sun goes down late. And do this on a regular basis. Eat after the sun goes down, and you will absolutely certainly gain weight. But if you just eat a big breakfast and stimulate your metabolism, or eating your majority of your calories in the middle of the day, and then you cut it before 5 p.m., because then you have about 4 hours till sleep, so you can fully digest. But even earlier, I think, is better, 3 p.m. But, the Ayurvedic doctor I worked with said from the ancient traditions, 5 p.m. is a pretty good bench line. Then you probably won't be gaining more weight, generally speaking. Unless you live in toxic blue light and that's your office all the time and you never get sun, then no matter what, you're going to be starving your brain. Because that's another thing, is like people who are fat, obese, overweight. Fat doesn't sound nice, but, so anyway, they're actually don't have an excess of energy, which is the theory. They have a mega, mega, mega lack of energy in the brain. And so the brain is just like, give me more, give me more, give me more, give me more, give me more food. And so, but the body, because the engines are so toast, it will never be able to burn through it effectively. So it's just more fat, more fat, more fat, more fat. Dr. Cruz got famous for writing about this. It's called leptin sensitivity. When the brain's energy accountant center, the leptin receptor in the hypothalamus, basically the fat cells are sending up the signal constantly like, we have enough, we have enough, we have enough. But it's called leptin resistance. Again, fat cells make this hormone called leptin to signal to the brain like, we're good. And that keeps us like, well, I'm not hungry, I'm full. But if the brain has been damaged constantly by all this blue light, lack of sunlight, then it's like, we need more, we need more, we need more, we're starving. And so it isn't ever listening to the leptin signal. So that's literally how someone gets fat. It's
Holy crap.
super easy. It's
so being
easy.
exposed to fake junk light, blue light at night makes you fat, and that's how it does it.
It's super, super simple. Like it disrupts.
I always wondered that because I've heard people talk about that, and I'm like, what? Like, what is? I don't get it.
Well, just think about it. Like you're putting in people who are overweight. Again, it's not like these are any less people. Of course, obviously, these are people who are struggling from lack of this knowledge. But you're putting in fuel, and it's like someone who's overweight. Like they're eating a ton of food because and people know like. Though someone who's overweight, like they like their sugar, they like their carbs. They want to eat a lot of that generally. And again, it's because the mitochondria are damaged and the body is starving. I don't have the mechanisms 100% lined out, but essentially it's like the engines can't burn through whatever's coming in effectively. So it's like you're putting in a ton of food, but the body's just insulin, because that's what puts sugars into the fat cells. Insulin is just putting it in the fat, putting the food you eat in the fat, putting it in the fat. But that person never feels fully satiated, so they just kind of keep eating because the engines are really not good at burning into that. And the other issue, so not only are the engines totally bad at burning the carbs that the person's eating and burning the food, so it's being packed on as fat, but also that there's mitochondrial damage going on in that case. And so because the mitochondria are damaged and the leptin whole signal is damaged, the brain's hormone balancing systems are damaged, that person can never tap into their own fat stores to burn off their fat. So it's like they finish their carb high from one meal and they can't tap into what they already got, which is how we're designed to do. Because, like, let's say you eat like a banana. Generally speaking, you're not going to burn that whole banana on the spot unless you've been exercising. Generally, you're going to pack on some of it as fat. But what you can do, if everything's working properly, you just literally eat the banana or whatever meal you have, and then after the blood sugar spike and you're done burning the sugar from your blood is over, then you just tap into your fat and you start burning what was stored as fat. And then you're good for like 8-10 hours until the next meal or whatever, because we're designed to not be eating all that. Like imagine a wild human. Like, would wild humans be eating 3 meals a day, 2 meals a day? Like, I would presume not, But we can 2-3 meals a day. But again, that's 2-3 meals a day. Most people who are overweight are eating more than 2-3 meals a day. They're eating lots of snacks, and they're eating mostly refined carbs and sugars. So again, someone who's overweight, they put in all these carbs and sugars. Their body burns through what's in the bloodstream, but then once it's burned through most of it and stored the rest as fat, they don't tap into the fat that they've stored and just burn that till the next meal. They need the next hit. And then you're toast. You're packing it on, and you can never tap into it. So that's like obesity, weight gain 101. How do you fix it? Light diet. The light diet. My voice is shot. The light diet. That's the answer.
You were trying to be like, light diet.
Light diet. Yeah, no. Sorry, everyone. That was a mega fail.
Oh, that's funny. We got
I don't know if
that
wasn't quite a voice crack. That would be really embarrassing if it were.
Light diet. I like that one. The teenager on The Simpsons.
I've gotten past that. Yeah.
The teenager on The Simpsons. I was like, excuse me, sir. Voice cracks. So. Oh man, so much stuff to unpack there. One thing I didn't actually ask Alexander Wunsch. It was on my notes, but I had so many notes, and
are you about to down that butter straight up?
Yeah, dog. As soon as you're talking again.
Someone told me that when you go to Antarctica, if you're hiking or anything, because there's nowhere to buy food, obviously, unless you're a researcher at the main cafeteria, you have to pack in your own food, obviously, because again, nowhere to buy it.
Yeah.
And you just have to bring butter because calorie for calorie, it's the most energy dense.
Oh,
and
wow.
My friend Ryan Carter, who I think you might have acquainted with at this event, really cool dude. He runs a Live Vitae Instagram account with all food, and he's talking about light now. He showed me a study this morning, which Boros talked about as well. You have the fat. If you eat a certain amount of fat, you'll make 100 grams or whatever of deuterium-depleted water. Or 1 gram of fat, it's like 1.1 grams of deuterium-depleted water. If you have the same amount of carbs, you're having half of that made as water. So what Dr. Boros and them mentioned when you're eating fats, you're making more water. It's true. It's much more energy dense. There's more hydrogen. You got butter all up on your beard, dude. It's hilarious. Guys, Luke's chomping off from a butter stick right now.
It's going to be an awesome YouTube video.
Just to be clear, here I am just like...
Dude, when I podcast back-to-back like this, there's no time to eat, dog. And I just... I think that's why...
Get this man a fork.
Well, my last guest, because they knew I was back-to-back recording today, she said, do you want me to bring you any food? I was like, yeah, I'm really easy. Bring me meat or fish, and a lot of fat. So
I was going to bring you brisket, but I figured...
She started up with grass-fed beef sides, like some skirt steak or something, some avocado, and a huge thing of really amazing pastured, grass-fed, organic butter. I was like, wow, if every guest did that, hint, hint, Matt, well, you brought glasses, I would be super stoked.
So lay it on me.
Well, what I didn't ask Wunsch was... We covered all the light shit, like in gory detail, just excruciatingly
bulbs,
scientific shit. Yeah, junk lighting and all that, and sun a bit. But what I forgot to ask him was the exposure of the blue light on your skin. And we've talked about that, but there's like conflicting information. There was that one study where they take a blue light bulb and shine it on the back of someone's knee or some shit, and it suppressed melatonin. Remember, you know that study? But then other people were like, it was a fake-ass study. We don't really know. But I didn't get to ask him, like, say, so I'm under the blue light right now, this heinous LED that's right over my head, which Wunsch said lighting should never be directly overhead because in nature it never is. The sun's like very rarely right on top of you. Just so that was interesting. But so right now this thing's shining down on me. I've got your raw optics glasses on, which is just so much more pleasant in here. But that light's still shining down on my scalp and it's on my arms. So sometimes I'll be like all blue blocked out with the eyewear, but then I'll get up, say I'm in a hotel, like not at home because I have all amber lights in my house anyway, but I'll be out somewhere and then I walk around naked under some lights. And I'm like, fuck, am I like defeating the whole purpose of like getting it off the eyes? So what do you know about the blue light having a negative effect when it is exposed to your skin?
Absolutely. This is not an area I have dug into too deeply, but what I can say is that there was a study that came out not too long ago showing that we do have melanopsin, which is basically, to make a long research period more straightforward, for a super long time, it was well known, over 150 years, it was well known that they're the rods and cones in the eyes, which were thought to be the two main photoreceptors, the only ones. But then they noticed all these effects that were going on independent of the rods and the cones. And what they would do is they would literally either mutate mice so that they had messed up rods and cones, or they would lacerate the optical portions of their eyes that were good for seeing, pretty messed up. But they would still have certain effects going on in their bodies without having functional vision. There was clear indications that the body could work and the circadian rhythm could even be maintained, even when the light was not coming in visually. So basically, what they came to figure is there must be a third kind of photoreceptor that mediates all these other systems that are going on in the body, and it must not be visual related. And eventually, so they discovered these cells called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, and basically, eventually they found the pigment in these intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, these third, mysterious, unknown receptors that modulated all of these other processes in the body, hormone production, melatonin synthesis, all this other stuff, even when they had cut the visual abilities of the animals out. Non-visual stuff was going on. They couldn't figure out why. So these cells, they contain a pigment, because they had to have a pigment, something that could receive the light. They couldn't figure out what it was that made them photosensitive. They just called them intrinsically photosensitive. So in the late 90s, there was a researcher from the States who discovered what the pigment was. It's called melanopsin. Long story short, it's the third pigment, essentially, that allows us to see, or the third class of photoreceptors in our eyes. And so this same pigment, melanopsin, that was found in first certain animals and reptiles' eyes and then in human eyes has now been located in a ton of other parts in the body, including the skin and subcutaneous fat, the fat below the skin.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So Dr. Kruse, as someone, an expert on light, when he learned about this, he started saying, guys, this is a huge, big deal. And he made a big talk about it in Vermont in 2018 at this Weston A. Price Foundation event that he would speak at the last couple of years. And he basically said, now the research is clear, people have to get their skin in the game too. Because there's melanopsin in the skin. So essentially, yeah, Dr. Cruz's most, for example, sick patients do cover their skin at night as well. And generally, like right now, it's the day, so I'm not as concerned about it. But at night, yeah, I do feel a little bit exposed. Now, having this knowledge, when I have all my skin exposed to artificial light at night, as well as my eye, or even if my eyes are covered. So I would say that probably, again, it's really hard to say because the studies haven't been done that I'm aware of. How much does it compare? Like, is it like the eye is, 100 times more sensitive than the skin, or 10 times more sensitive, or whatever? It's really hard to say. I would presume, because the eye is the main light receptor for the body, and in many ways it's like the main driver for hormone function, that it is a lot more sensitive through the eyes, so it's way better to block the blue from the eyes. But I think it's probably smart, to block it from the skin. But the cool thing is, as a fashion guy, you're pretty much always covered up, at night at least, with pants and a sweatshirt or something like that. Especially at night, LA gets cool because it's the desert. So actually, there's a picture one time of you and I at Bulletproof, and I was wearing my board short attire and whatnot, and you were wearing pants, and Jack commented, like, Luke wins, Matt loses, because of the research.
Under the conference lighting?
Mm-hmm. Well, it was actually just outside of Bulletproof, so there was lights on us and everything.
Oh, yeah.
So that's kind of the deal.
Out in front of the labs.
Out front of
in
labs
Santa Monica.
when you did your talk.
That's right. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what the research indicates. It's not probably like something you need to really, really concern yourself about. However, there's research clear that we do have that blue light sensor pigment. And again, melanopsin isn't sensitive to the whole range of colors, kind of like the pigments in the rods and the cone cells are for vision. It's specifically sensitive to blue light between like 420, 430, up until about 500, a little bit more nanometers, and the peak sensitivity is around 479 nanometers, which is like pretty much almost what our screens and all the lights emit. Because even, this is the cool part, the people who were innovating artificial lights in order to extend the working hours and productivity in industrial factories in the late 1800s, which was like the first main drive for artificial lighting and the biggest utility of it. Now we just use it because it's like natural for us. Very few people are working en masse, past 5 p.m. in general. We're just using it because now we're conditioned to use it, even though we don't even need it, and it's actually killing us and, reducing our lifespan and reducing our melatonin and mitochondrial DNA repair, which is another one of the indirect mechanisms that light affects. This is what my talk here was about. It was like the whole light diet and the direct and indirect ways that light affects the ignition system. So like one of the direct ways, that red light from the sun affecting the cytochromes on the respiratory protein chain that funnels the electrons, basically. Same reason, it's the reason the Joovv works, because it gives those specific proteins the frequencies that make them work optimally, so the engine, the mitochondria, just starts kicking. An indirect way is you're exposed to light at night. That suppresses melatonin. Melatonin doesn't repair the mitochondrial DNA, so the mitochondria can't work the way they're designed to. It's just a natural system that's built in to allow mitochondria to find solutions to basically crappy environments. And so it's there for a reason, but we're destroying it by doing this artificial light at night stuff. But so what was basically found naturally was if they made lights that had a little bit more blue, and this wasn't till later. The earliest bulbs were actually mostly red and infrared. Wunsch probably mentioned incandescent bulbs have mostly red and infrared, less blue. But as we went on, the fluorescence they found had big spikes of blue, and that activates the cortisol and ACTH, the stress hormones, which is part of what the sun activates during the day, and it's designed to. So now you have sun coming up, and you get one spike of cortisol in the morning. Sun goes down, and then you turn on all these artificial lights, and you're having another spike of totally unnatural spike of cortisol going on. So basically, if we're doing that on our skin in addition to our eyes, it's probably not a good thing, because that, again, this all comes from that one pigment being specifically sensitive to that range. That's why artificial lights have been made in our phone screens too, to be addictive, because they stimulate these pathways of waking up and energy. People have told me many times now in the last 2 years, like when they have the red shift, the red blocker, which you made this sweet Instagram post on, everyone should check that out and follow Luke too, and me, The Light Diet. There is much of a less of a tendency to be addicted to the screen, because you're not getting that like hit that it gives you.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I thought it was just because the screen looks like shit when it's all dark red, and
could be that too.
It makes Instagram suck. But that's interesting. Yeah, it's actually not stimulating at all. So you pick up your phone to get that hit.
I mean, of course,
and it's like,
Just think about humans as little like aliens, Martians, were just like working through. And you see people constantly staring at this bright emitter. Like if you were a extraterrestrial being, you would probably just perceive that this thing makes people feel good. I mean, we as a waking, conscious being, like we think, oh, it's the Instagram that makes it feel good. But what is it? It's actually just beams of light coming off of a screen in certain patterns and changing. And just the beams of light, I mean, this is fascinating to think about. Like, again, what is the information from a phone coming into your brain? It's literally just beams of light displayed in certain fashions. So literally, I mean, if anyone has any doubts that beams of light affect your hormones and your brain chemistry, look at a picture of a hot girl on Instagram, okay? That's beams of light that are structured in a certain way that you remember, and it basically incites tremendous things going on in the body. I mean, that's one example. Or if you're a woman, whoever you're attracted to. But consider that, for example. Or if you're just playing a game, like, again, considering humans from an extraterrestrial perspective, you're looking at this organism with literally just a light-emitting metal box. And it's like all these different funky patterns and blah, 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 blah. And it's just shining all these different patterns onto the brain, creating this whole reward process. At the end of the day, it's really just light stimulating the brain's reward centers from the phone. Even though we think it's messages from our friend, that gives us another different sort of hit. But really, it's this light coming off the screen that's stimulating all of these different things going on in the brain, and that's what's doing these things. So yeah.
That's trippy, dude. I never thought about that.
I mean, yes, again, of course, like to be clear, this is not scientifically tested and proven 100%, but if you think about it, it's pretty clear. Yes, you get a message from someone you're into, okay, then there's like that connection. But just people scrolling and staring at a screen long term, like you're just getting a bunch of this light that kind of like perks you up, and then great example actually, babies who don't have the consciousness, this is what I was looking for, babies who don't really have quite yet the consciousness to be able to really make much of a phone screen. Literally, there's babies who, like my mom and people have mentioned to me in Starbucks, I've even seen it now several times. They take the phone, and there's YouTube videos too, they take the phone away from the baby, and the thing erupts. It's like, crying, screaming. There's no way that a 6-month-old baby was, like, intellectually connected to what was going on the screen. Okay, not that there's no way, because there totally is, but to me it's pretty clear, again, based on the way that the blue light, which is the main base of the light on the screen, affects our dopamine systems. It gives us, like, a quick hit, even though it's, like, kind of stealing from our reserve, if you will. The baby is getting this dopamine because it doesn't get any sun. It's like getting its stimulation from the blue light. But the thing is, that's like the fastest way to destroy a baby's hormones. I mean, that thing, a baby that's getting that will never develop even fully and properly because of just constant pregnenolone steal syndrome, it's called, where there's chronic activation of cortisol via just the blue light stimulating into the eye, because just blue light coming into the eye leads to stimulation of cortisol production. And that comes from a precursor called pregnenolone, which is also the precursor for testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone, our sex hormones. So if you're just always shining blue phone screen in your eye, it doesn't even have to be on your skin, it's saying make cortisol, wake up, wake up, wake up. But it's always going to be stealing from your reserves that's supposed to go to your sex steroid hormones. So you're going to basically be infertile because you're constantly signaling to your brain, make cortisol.
Holy shit.
Stealing from the precursor from your fucking sex steroid hormones.
Son, and that's true. Obviously, if you're someone that's just indoors and is like, oh, I can't be bothered to wear blue blocking glasses, and I'm not going to change my light bulbs in my house. It doesn't matter. It's whatever.
Yeah. Or if you just don't get the sun that powers, because you do need the full spectrum. There's one problem with artificial light is the actual spectral component, the fact that it doesn't mimic sunlight. It has the flicker. Wunsch went into this deeply with you, so people will hear this. But the other problem is that you're just not in the sun. You're a living being, which for 4 billion years, or at least since the time we came to the surface of the ocean, so 2-3 billion years, was exposed to the full spectrum of sun that ended up creating, basically driving and powering a ton of these different reactions, which we've discussed, that like the mitochondrial function, like vitamin D synthesis. But that also includes UV light, breaking apart molecules like tryptophan and tyrosine, which become serotonin, melatonin, and dopamine, respectively. So one problem with artificial light is that it has a messed up spectral composition. The other problem is that it tricks the human body into being able to stay awake and be conscious and awake in an existence that doesn't have the full spectrum, which pretty much for all of evolution, we were designed to be getting anytime we were awake and conscious to power our wakefulness and consciousness. So just the act of you and me being in here. Imagine if there were no such thing as artificial lights and we were sitting in this room. We would be asleep because we would be so tired because it would be completely pitch black, right? So these lights are allowing us, our brains, to be tricked to think, oh, actually, we can be awake right now. But we don't have ultraviolet, infrared, and the general full spectrum powering all of the other reactions and things that are generally, how can I say, generally expected with wakefulness. And so if you think about it from the photobiomodulation, red light panels, mitochondrial side, like this light, which we're using to trick ourselves to stay awake right now when we would be in a dark building otherwise, like a cave, essentially, or just nighttime, more likely in nature, it's allowing us to stay awake. But all throughout evolution, with this wakefulness powered by this, we also would have had infrared and red light from the sun powering those mitochondria. So just the act of you and I being inside right now is lowering our function. And because we don't have that red light, which would normally be present with this, so again, we're basically stealing from Peter to pay Paul, maybe is the best analogy. We're tricking the brain, stay awake, be conscious. But we don't have the full power behind that. And so you and I, just by being inside, we're accelerating our death right now, basically, compared to what would be if we were just sitting outside under the full spectrum. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
It's like a trick. It's a trick. It's a complete trick.
Yeah.
We're tricking the body to stay awake under under the spectrum, which, again, for all of evolution was powering our body, and we are not under that spectrum anymore. It's expecting that, and we should be having that. So, like, for example, my mitochondria right now are not working as well as they would be if we were outside, just because of the lack of infrared and red light. And so we're putting a burden on our body by saying, wake, power me, but not giving it all the things that we evolved. So that's one way of creating lowered function across time. And imagine, to me, the most fascinating thing, and I gave a talk about this in Germany 2 months ago, was just how good we actually could function as individuals and where we're at. I mean, like, imagine the potential of an individual that actually is in line with, like, our, evolutionary abilities. And the three people I used in my talk were the three top performers in their industries in the world. Usain Bolt grew up in Jamaica, top sprinter in the world, probably outside a ton growing up in the equatorial sun. He has a skin for it too, to protect him, and he's out a lot. Cristiano Ronaldo, arguably and quite reasonably so, one of the two greatest soccer players of all time, with Messi, and there's others as well. But he grew up in Madeira, which is one of the furthermost or southernmost points of all of Europe. Islands off the coast of Portugal, but way south, closer to like Africa in latitude. So that, and for example, Giselle, she's a white German girl whose parents moved to Brazil, so she grew up in like Brazilian light and probably eating pretty good food too, and probably not exposed to tons of EMF when they were kids. And they're like beasts. That's, I think, what every human has the potential to be like inside from birth. And if our mom has good practices in her life, because the mom, we inherit their mitochondria. So if we get really bad mitochondria from our mom, which I kind of think I probably had some disadvantage in that situation, which is why I had the issues at such a young age, in addition to other things, being a vegetarian for so many years, and so on and so on. Like, that's my theory. That's the thing that fascinates me, is like, that's where humans, I think, totally can be. And even just within my life now, I'm fascinated, how close could I get to those mega humans, Giselle, supermodel,
I'd
super
like to
beautiful.
get close to that mega human.
Yeah, of course.
Bing.
So, there's exceptions. Tom Brady, I don't think grow up. He didn't grow up in a tropical region. He's the best football player. So there's other factors, of course. But light and being in these optimal environments allow us to function properly and optimally.
So, dude, I came in here today in the makeshift studio at 12 o'clock, and it's now 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
And I made it out for about 20 minutes to stand outside with the intention of just getting natural light in my eyes. And I'm in here all day. And I've been going, but you can imagine how much extra I've had to push to be able to stay in, a reasonable state of cognitive function, to be able to keep my notes and manage the equipment and stay in a conversation.
I'm glad you've made it.
And pay attention and listen. But I can tell you, if I would have been seated on a little patio or out, outdoor in a
that's it. Even in the shade, doesn't have to be direct.
I would be crushing it so much more right now, and I can tell I'm doing okay. But this is also why I've been taking the blue cannatine all day, and I took some paracetam and my chaga elixir and taking all kinds of shit that I probably wouldn't even need if I was just getting the right amount of light. And I was getting, you know, as you said, that red light.
Yeah.
So one thing I've been doing over here, primarily just to
be clear, we don't even know how much the full spectrum of light influences our biology. It's clear. There's a Ben Greenfield podcast that's coming out on the 21st of September that I did, going through all of the research practically. So people when this is released, will be able to go back and listen to that.
Oh, cool.
About the light diet. But basically, for someone who wants to know about some of the many ways that light affects every single aspect of the body and loads of the research done, check that out, because it's just like so unbelievable. And it just leads one to believe like we probably don't even have even a fraction of what the sun does in full, you know? So it's just like, it's clear that it powers so many things. And so to me, it's just not smart practice to remain in an indoor lifestyle at all.
Yeah, that if we stay in an indoor lifestyle, we end up in an indoor hospital. Period.
Which isn't a good place to heal.
Period. Yeah.
Yeah. Even Florence Nightingale, keep the thought. Florence Nightingale in the late 1850s, who's this mega doctor who's well known, you know, by name. She wrote a quote to the tune of something like, "We know that when we have a hospital, in the rooms where they're not lit well, patients will never heal. No matter how much we do, essentially, patients don't heal in dark rooms. We can put heat, we can do all this, but without the healing of the sun's rays, they don't get well, generally speaking." And it's just fascinating. You know, they knew that way back then.
Yeah, that's hella trippy, dude. Well, one thing I've been doing on this trip, and I want to get, you know, kind of circle back around to your travels, because that was almost like your version of Autobiography of a Yogi. It sounds like you've traveled around and met all these key players that synchronistically have added pieces of the puzzle to help you build your knowledge base, which is trippy. But
into the light diet.
Yeah, but on the travel tip, one thing I did this time, because I really, really wanted to hack jet lag, because I had to come perform at, for me, what would be a really high level right after landing within a couple days, you know, being the MC, doing a talk, recording podcasts, a pretty demanding schedule.
Absolutely. I'm impressed.
I couldn't afford to have jet lag. So what I did this time is I got this product. Someone just emailed me, I think, and I'm so sorry. I mean, email. See, I'm losing it now. Losing my sharpness. Someone emailed me and said, "Hey, we make this light device product, blah, blah, blah. Maybe we want to run ads on the show or put it in your site store." And I was like, I didn't even look at what it was. I just told my assistant, cool, like, have them send it. I think it's called a Verilux, and it's a little LED panel of full, like, kind of looks like an iPad, but there's nothing on it except this really bright, what looks like blue-white light, but it's actually full spectrum light, and it's used for seasonal affective disorder. So it's like the equivalent of going out into the sun, basically. And if you sit close enough, it's quite bright.
Be careful comparing.
Well, yeah, I mean,
the sun.
You know, when you don't have sun, okay, kind of like the human charger. You know, you're shining like blue light onto your brain because there is no sun, as a means by which to trick yourself into a different time zone.
Yeah, I'm skeptical of that, but
all right. Well, listen, you haven't heard the whole fucking story yet, Matt. So I bring that, and I bring my little Juve Go, the red light. And so in the morning, what I've done every morning is wake up really early. Well, really early for me is like 7. And the first thing I do is just crank both of those up. The red kind of more directly in my face, and then the blue full spectrum one over here. And the interesting thing is I tested the flicker on the Verilux thing, if I'm getting the name right. No flicker, which is weird. I'm like, how did they do that?
It's definitely possible, yeah.
Oh, it is? Yeah.
I think it's possible.
Because I was like, I'm not going to look at it if it's got flicker. I'm not into it. But it doesn't. And I got to say, dude, I think it really, really helped my jet lag to get that kind of fake sunrise light in the morning, like more red with a little blue on the side. I mean, I'm like hacking the sun horribly, as you indicated. But it really fucking helped, dude. I adjusted to the time zone really fast to where even the first night I was here, I fell asleep at, 11:30 or whatever. Woke up at 7, and I didn't feel jet lag at all. I was a little tired just from travel and stuff.
Yeah.
But that like real brain foggy, like sleepy in the middle of the day, like that technical jet lag feeling has not existed at all. And I came here and just absolutely slayed.
I would say in extreme cases like the one of flying across an ocean in a 10-hour period like you did, it isn't necessarily a bad idea to do that. But the key that I would want to be clear for a listener is that, again, we simply don't know what frequencies that aren't in the Juve panel, and aren't in the Verilux. Particularly, I mean, ultraviolet is one that's definitely not there, but that wouldn't normally be there at sunrise anyway. But there's certain frequencies from the sunrise that won't be in those lights. It's just inevitable because they're not full spectrum completely, and they're not mimicking the sunrise exactly. The Verilux is more like a midday light based on what you've described, a more blue-white color. The Juve is more like a sunset light, sunrise, with mostly red. So, and the thing in the sunrise is that the blue comes up in like a fashion that has been the same for the last several billions of years. Like the blue slowly rises practically at the same rate, and the variation throughout the seasons of the blue rising practically at the same rate probably signals to our brain what season it is. And in the summer we're more fertile, in the winter we're less fertile. Like it's really finely tuned. So personally, I would never do that with the Verilux. Or I think the red light side of things is, unless I learned some research that was more compelling about it, but at this point, having read about it, I'm very skeptical of those particular bright panels. The red panels, actually, I like the Juve guys and also other red light companies. I think those are much safer because they're just basically hooking you up with specific frequencies that have been shown to improve the mitochondria. As long as the panels don't have tons of flicker, I'll use those just a bit, and I think any negative effects would be relatively minimal, and the benefits seem to be pretty strong.
You mean the flicker being the only... That's the only downside I can see.
But the other downside is, like, you could go out and lay naked in the sun, even if it's cloudy, and get the full spectrum on your skin and your eyes. Not naked, but maybe with just shorts on. Or you're behind a Juve. So it's like, yes, it's a hack for people who don't have the option to go outside. But, like, if you can go outside and have your skin exposed to the full spectrum of the sun, I would 100%, 10 times out of 10, pick it over any artificial setup. And even here, like, what I do is I literally just open the window in the morning and I just look at the sky, even if I'm not looking directly at the sunrise. So to me, I'm almost thinking the question, like, yeah, why wouldn't you just open your window and just look out at the gray, blue, whatever color it may be? The buildings reflect some of the gold of the light of the sunrise if you're not able to look right at it, which is better, like even Dr. Chris Shade, after you left last night, actually, he was telling Tim and I, and Sim stayed literally talking with him for 2 more hours. It was like 12 once we left. So
really? God damn
epic. 12:30.
See, I always am afraid I stayed way later than I want to because I'm afraid I'm going to miss some key information.
No, well, I can just regurgitate the key, to me, the most key parts. He said that long ago when he studied with certain masters of sorts, he learned that the 2 like mega most important protocols, I forget the term he used to describe them, but mega important, such that he couldn't even share them publicly based on the mandates of these masters, were sun gazing and sky gazing.
What?
Yeah, sun gazing, sky gazing.
Damn.
So like sun gazing is known, people who sun gaze, they've measured their pineal glands are way bigger. Imagine like the pineal gland, not only is it the cross section of the pineal gland is the Ra logo, the eye of Horus. That's like the Egyptians knew that third eye that people have is basically the pineal gland. So they knew that, and the pineal gland is considered the third eye, and it's also the producer of melatonin. So if your pineal gland is way bigger from sun gazing, which is what at least some evidence indicates from a couple, granted they are sort of anecdotes, but imagine how much higher your consciousness would be if your pineal gland is bigger. So sun gazing seems to be hugely good. And the Ayurvedic doctor who I have been meeting and discussing with also said it's really good for the eyes, for people who have eye problems. That would be like, if I had any prescription, I'd be sun gazing sunrise and sunset an hour each day or 30 minutes, depending on if it's the summer and it's stronger. And I think I'd be able to fix eye problems like this. Also with not wearing glasses, trying to exercise the eyes. Depends how long you've had it. But anyhow, yeah. So Verilux and Juve combination, maybe in a pinch, great. But just I would open the window and then have the full spectrum coming in. And if you want to still do the Verilux and the Juve with the full spectrum coming in from the outdoors, then I think it's way less
That's what
risky.
I was doing, to be clear, so I'm awesome. Let's just settle that.
Exactly. There you go. Settled.
What did I want to do next? Oh, I mean, it's hard. It's hard not to
travel and that
overlap
kinda
with it.
thing?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard not to overlap with the Alexander Wunsch. And again, I don't know which one's going to come first.
Oh,
But
we can keep at it.
as we said earlier, this is such an important topic to cover. A and B, people need to really be hammered over the head to like get something straight. And to me, this light thing is like, I mean, as we discussed in the beginning, it trumps diet in such a major way because of the mitochondria and everything that you described. And I'm just like, God, I just feel like I want to go around and like shake people like, dude, wake the fuck up. Like people just don't get it. So I'm going to go ahead and repeat something that they may have heard. Tell us what happens because, okay, when you go look at a new house, they'll be like, oh, it has tons of natural light. No, it doesn't. Those are windows. So talk to us about what sunglasses, contacts, and being behind glass does.
So glass, and Dr. Wunsch said this so beautifully in his talk actually as well. When we have glass, because of code for building and environmental reasons, they're designed to filter out the near infrared portion of the sun and a lot of the infrared portion because it'll make a building too hot, so you have to run more AC generally. So they filter that out. But these are the frequencies that, like we've discussed, the mitochondria use to be charged. So anytime you're behind that light and you're like, oh, it's basically full spectrum sunlight and I'm awake and it's, driving my biology. It's not as bad as the other lights because it doesn't have as much flicker per se, but you don't have that infrared that's powering up the mitochondria. So you're basically creating more cortisol from the blue, stressing the body to be awake and functioning, but you're not giving it the juice to function properly. So we're basically just stealing from our, essentially, I haven't quite figured out what we're stealing from, but it's essentially, actually no, it's from the mitochondrial function. The cells, by the fact of being exposed, this is so beautiful because these pieces come together, even just in my mind from repeating them enough times. We're lacking red, which makes the mitochondria function at their optimal energy generation level. Let's just be clear, optimal or Gucci, totally good. With the red and the blue, the full spectrum. You cut the red, you leave the blue, so the body's mitochondrial function is going down. And like we discussed in the case of the evolutionary effect of mitochondria, because we discussed this in our other episode way long ago. I got to stop saying that because we discussed everything practically then. But the cells, there's a whole cell, like a whole organism, but then there's thousands or hundreds up to 1,000 of these mitochondria in a single cell. So like I just scratched off probably 1 million cells or something, insane amount of cells just from scratching. And then each of those tiny little cells each has hundreds of mitochondria. So in the lifetime of one cell, it might be, I don't know, let's just say a day. I actually have no idea how long a cell lives. I should definitely know that. But then a mitochondria, within the lifetime of that one cell, there's so much turnover. So in terms of, if you had to adjust to a new environment, a new situation as an evolving organism, would it be better to have the nuclear genes, which there's one set of those main nuclear genes, nucleus genes, DNA, which is what people think of as DNA, in one whole cell? Or would it be better to have that adjust versus the mitochondrial genes adjusting, of which there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and they're turning over way faster? Naturally, of course, life uses the mitochondrial genes as a faster way to have evolution occur as far as energy goes. It won't change your eye color maybe per se super quickly, although my eye colors have changed since getting more sun. They've gone from brown to lighter to let more light in, so presumably. So like brown, pretty brown for sure, to where it's like definitely hazel, definitively. It probably need to change it on my driver's license eventually. But anyhow, so we don't want to have basically toxic light that is disrupting the process of the mitochondria. And because what that's doing is that's creating more generation of these free radicals, because when we have, again, less red, infrared 2, which is what the Juve and these devices provide, but also the full spectrum sun does the best of, then we have more blue, and so lowered mitochondrial energy generation, which is what this guy, Dr. Wallace, who I hope you interview very soon, has found. That leads to massive increase of this reactive oxygen species, these super inflammatory molecules, which are generally signaling molecules, which is normally good, and that's why eating insane amounts of antioxidants isn't necessarily a good idea. And antioxidants will never fix this problem, just to be clear, everyone, because the fundamental issue is there. And just, you're going to create more antioxidants. or reactive oxygen species, and that those mutate the mitochondrial DNA, which lead to the dysfunction in the mitochondrial, let's say, ignition system, which we've been talking about from the beginning. So being just behind a window, lowering mitochondrial energy production, increasing reactive oxygen species to try to mutate the mitochondrial DNA set to try to figure out a solution to the altered environment. The best example, because I haven't given an analogy, which I usually do to make these things more understandable, you're a human. You migrate to the tops of the Himalayas. You have way less oxygen now per square meter of air, because it's way less dense. The percentage is still the same, but it's way less dense, so there's just less of it in the average in the same amount of space. But your mitochondria use oxygen to work. So every breath you take has like half as much oxygen. So like your mitochondria are screaming. Tons of reactive oxygen species leads to mutation of the mitochondrial genes such that over even just a couple generations, people who live at high altitudes like the Sherpas and the Mount Everest and so on, they have mutations now in their mitochondrial genes where they're able to make very high amounts of energy with way less oxygen. Epic. That's basically how it happens. So now we're going inside. So our bodies are actually looking for solutions. How can we function better with more blue light, less red light? And essentially what's actually just happening is because, again, we're lacking the Sherpas were able to find a solution related to the fact that they have more UV light higher up when they have less oxygen, something along those lines. But we don't really have, we're just draining our energy supply. Like, imagine life is something that's powered by energy. And so, you go somewhere, and in nature, generally, if you don't have the energy to supply it, people would probably never live in that place, A, or B, maybe be, slightly lower functioning versions of that human. So today, again, as we're powered by energy too, we go to a place that has less energy for us to function at our top level. We could try to find solutions, but really, we're just gonna have to cut programs in the government system, like we've discussed, cutting the programs, and that means the immune system doesn't work properly, the brain doesn't work properly, we're depressed, we can't clear the plaques out, so we get Alzheimer's. The arteries are all messed up, and there's all these cholesterol going to try to repair them. And then we get these clots, and people say it's because of cholesterol, when cholesterol is just going there to try to fix the problem that we're creating, through our modern toxic lifestyle. So, yeah, windows, no bueno, just to be clear.
Same for
windows lead to de-evolution. That's what I'm saying.
And same for wearing sunglasses.
Same with sunglasses, same with contacts. Contacts are also really bad because they reduce oxygen. The cornea, the surface of the eye, is the only part of the body, but that it's on top of the lens. It's the tippity top. Only part of the body that breathes from the air directly.
Oh, shit.
So if you put contacts on, and they know this, they make them permeable to oxygen, but you never make them permeable enough to oxygen. So, it's never going to match what it was. So, there's increased reactive oxygen species generation in those mitochondria, in those cells, in the cornea, which means they're mutating the mitochondrial DNA, which means they're having to basically, the lowered energy production, lowered function, and then this the cells are going to turn over faster, wear out the supply of cells that's maybe stem cells. That's again, part of this is rock hard science, that the blue light increases reactive oxygen species, red light makes the mitochondria function better, contacts lower oxygen, and then so it's just a natural clear progression. When you do these things, it's leading to increased aging, or sped up aging, accelerated aging of those cells, faster turnover, which presumably, the new cells are coming from somewhere. They're wearing away from stem cell supply. They're taking lots of energy to remake them. And so people who have vision problems wearing contacts, I would presume, need stronger prescriptions a lot faster than people who wear glasses generally, right, depending on how much time you spend indoors or outdoors. I know because my brother and sister both have contacts. Their prescriptions get stronger as time goes on. They're not doing this stuff at the moment, maybe eventually. So yeah, that's a problem with contacts. Sunglasses also distort the spectrum by cutting out the UV, so it's similar, these frequencies, even though only a tiny bit of UV gets through the eyes, it's still enough where this researcher back in the 60s, Dr. John Ott, who's one of Wunsch's, let's say, mentors and teachers, inspirations probably as well, he showed very clearly that there's the chlorophyll cells, chloroplasts, the little things in plant cells that make them green and basically generate the sugar, from the sun directly. When the light with UV and the full spectrum is shown on them, the pigment granules in it spin they do a full loop of the cell, and they're moving very effectively. And essentially what he determined from that is that it means that they're being powered properly. They're assimilating all the energy, and everything's moving the way it needs to. And when they would filter the light with like these filters and changing the color, the pigment granules of chlorophyll would basically take shortcuts through the path, and they would like slow down, and it was clear that the function was diminished of the cells. And then it turns out that in our eye, we have cells called retinal pigmental epithelial cells. And these look almost identical to chlorophyll cells or chlorophyll.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so basically, and they're inside of them, there's these pigment granules called melanin pigments, which are for absorbing UV light. Same thing happened when we filtered out the light. When they filtered out the light in the experiments, these were from a bunny rabbit's eyes, which are also like pretty close to us compared to plants. And when they filtered the light, it reduced the spinning, the speed of these melanin pigment granules, basically the activity of the cell. It reduced the function and activity of the cell. And, cutting out certain frequencies, particularly UV, really reduced the activity of the cell. Because we're designed to be powered by the full spectrum of light. We've taken advantage of it. It literally gave us the energy to become like more complex organisms. So to go ahead and say that it's like toxic and causes cancer is absurd. In the Ben Greenfield episode, I went really deep into the history of sun and skin cancer. I know a lot more about that than I did in the last episode. And essentially, it's pretty simple. Like, too much sun, too much UV is definitely bad. Burning, and so on. Excess exposure. People who work outdoors and can never get in the shade at the right times when their body would naturally do that, that will lead to leathery skin, wrinkles, and so on. But natural, healthy exposure won't only very, very likely improve the quality, the color of skin, less acne, that kind of thing, but also it'll reduce your risk of diabetes. Not just reduce your risk, but if you're doing this whole properly, potentially even eliminate the risk. But I can't say that for sure, and I'm not a medical doctor naturally, so these are just, none of this is medical advice, just informational. But, pretty much there's evidence showing that we've discussed, and Dr. Cruz is all about this too, that when you're exposed to sun via all these mechanisms, you reduce your happening of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, Alzheimer's, and autoimmune disease, and so on, because it's improving mitochondrial function with the full spectrum of light and so on. So when someone says, oh, I don't want to go in the sun, I don't want to get wrinkles, it's like, okay, it's basically saying, I value not getting wrinkles more than I value not getting cancer. But the thing is, it's not even accurate because it's based on the false premise that the sun always causes wrinkles. It's pretty much just absurd.
Dude, I have been going out in sun as much as possible, pretty much for as long as possible, for as long as I can remember, at least since my mid-20s, and spent time outdoors when I was a kid. I was a country boy. I mean, I was outdoors all the time. Maybe we had Atari at some point, but yeah, I was outdoors, and I'm 48. And my skin is not very wrinkly at all, dude. So that defeats that whole thing. And I guess
Glad you said it.
Some genetics or something. But it's a comment I get from people all the time. You're 48. Wow, your skin looks great. I'm not trying to
sun improves the function. Again, if you're burning, that's no bueno. And I've been actually, just to update, as I have been burning a lot of the last 2 years. Not good, like probably half of the last 2 years, to be quite honest. I have had a peeling nose, which is really bad because I've been super liberal with this. And I've learned from Dr. Wunsch, the expert on sunlight, who your interview will come out with shortly, maybe even before this one, that is not good. Very not good. And I need to stop doing that and be very cautious and careful. And so that's what I've learned. And that's part of the progression of this, Sun doesn't necessarily cause skin cancer. Excess constant burning without building up the natural solar protection is going to cause issues. But the thing is, like in nature, we're designed, when the sun comes back in the spring, like every day you're exposed, and your skin is going to build up day by day by day, little bit by bit. And if you're never overriding your natural mechanisms, just like a cat who goes in the sun and then goes in the shade when they've had enough, and they don't even need that much. We maybe need some more, maybe not, but we'll feel it. You go in the sun, you'll feel done. Okay, I'm out. And that naturally should work. But because we've been such an indoor lifestyle, people will want to go outside. And then it's just like the body's begging, like, give me everything you can get. But then you get fried. So it's a problem. So we've created the problem.
So you have to build your solar callus and work your way up.
Solar callus. Yeah, for people who don't know, it's like the callus on your feet from walking barefoot, callus on my fingers from playing guitar on the strings. It's just a buildup of skin. And it happens photochemically rather than like the way it happens from walking barefoot. Is just sort of abrasion and it triggers growth, that process. But it happens almost in a similar way with sunlight. UV light, basically kills the top levels cells on the skin, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because they scatter their DNA, which is, like we talked about with cells communicating with ultraviolet light. DNA is the ultimate absorber of ultraviolet light, and so it's like the ultimate sunscreen. Dr. Wunsch talks about this in several of his talks online. DNA is the ultimate sunscreen, and our cells use that, and it dissipates ultraviolet light into heat, vast majority of it. And so when we put on chemical sunscreens, which have tons of evidence showing that these cause all kinds of problems, they are never as effective as DNA at dissipating UV light into infrared light. And so they often also create all kinds of, because UV light's very strong, and like people know, if you leave certain things out in sun, there's always warnings, like it can cause miscoloration, because UV light is very strong. It breaks things apart naturally. And that's why it makes a lot of our hormones easy to make, because it breaks apart the precursor molecules so that they can easily become the next thing, like vitamin D.
Oh, word?
Yeah, UV light,
wow.
It's literally that simple. It's like I said, food gives us chemical energy to do a lot of stuff, but there's tons of stuff, and this is how Dr. Wunsch Alexander described it to me. UV light comes in via the skin and the eye, and literally it breaks apart certain molecules so that they can just become the next thing. And it's that simple. Like, you go in the sun, you're literally breaking apart molecules with the different, like I said, different frequencies affect different processes. Certain red frequencies enhance mitochondrial energy production. Blue frequencies are great in the day from the full spectrum of light, balanced by the red, the infrared, and so on. They create these spikes in cortisol and so on, but as long as we have the red there too, we're not going to have too much generation of these free radicals, reactive oxygen species. So it's super, super simple and straightforward.
So this is why getting midday sun in your nads helps you increase testosterone.
Yes, that would be one of the ways. But even just via the, even red light has been shown to increase testosterone. I'm not sure the mechanism of that, but I would guess it has to do with maybe increasing mitochondrial function in the nads. But like, even just through the blood and the eye, it could increase production of testosterone potentially because it's freeing up cholesterol and so on. But yeah, more likely, of course, it's shown when it's on that specific part of the body. Of course, it's going to enhance the function of that specific organ. So it's like a no-brainer.
With the mitochondria piece, recently learning what you had indicated earlier, that you inherit the amount of mitochondria you have when you're born from your mom.
Well, not the amount, but the percentage of DNA mutation in the mitochondria.
Okay, so the health of your mitochondria
exactly.
is passed down from your mom,
Precisely.
not your dad. So
100%.
Your dad could have totally trash mitochondria, be completely metabolically dysfunctional, and it's not going to have an input, at least on that.
On that, not necessarily, but then again, it very well could, because there's nuance to this. Basically, very likely, if he has all these problems, think about, like we said, the semen is the chi. It like holds the light. Essentially, your dad's semen is not going to be like the kind of sperm you want. Not the chronic, exactly.
Got it.
Not the chronic you want to be coming from. Maybe there might be a couple really good sperm cells in there, maybe millions, because there's tons. But you want really like energy enriched sperm cells, I presume, to function optimally. And we get tons of our, because it's going to combine with the egg and it's going to share its genes, and you want all of its genes to be functioning properly. I don't know much about research on that and so on, but this is just my presumption based on the research I've gathered. But also, for example, the genes that we do get from our father have a very large impact on the mitochondrial function, because although mitochondria did maintain a certain portion of genes going all the way back to the merging of life. This is a super fascinating topic. We got to hold this thought on the father's DNA. So we got to hold father's DNA. But basically, this is how I started my talk at this event. Maybe like circle that or something. But basically, how I started my talk at this event was going back to, I kind of said something to the tune of, there's all this chronic disease that we're facing today, including my own, and people are saying that the way to improve it is by using food-focused approaches, and I was basically saying I disagree for the reasons we've discussed in depth now. But of course, I figured to really convey the point, I wanted to describe, why don't we define what is health? And so to me, health is the optimal, an organism being able to carry out its functions properly. If you carry out your functions properly, you're probably going to be healthy. There's a different dictionary definition, but that's my definition. But in order to define an organism carrying out its functions properly, we want to get to the core of what is a living organism and what are the core functions of a living organism that kind of make it healthy and functional. So to do that, I had the next slide be about the alkaline hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the ocean where life began. And basically there's this fluid coming out of the earth that is alkaline, hence the name of the vents. And then there's this seawater, which is relatively acidic compared to the alkaline fluid coming in from the earth, although seawater is more neutral. It's just that the other was alkaline. So there was a gradient in these protons, because alkaline acidic just means there's different concentrations of H+, which is protons, like the stuff we're just drinking here. And all that means is that there's energy available. When there's more stuff on one side of a membrane and less on another, there's energy. And because of the tiny pores in these vents, there was like these gradients that were present. And the energy present, there's a researcher in London named Nick Lane, who you would also be well served to interview. Dr. Nick Lane, he's the leading researcher on the evolution of organisms, basically from the beginning of life on Earth. And so he essentially showed that he's researched how life came from the bottom of the ocean and from these vents. And the way that happened was with these proton gradients, with his natural energy. So people can read his book called The Vital Question. Bill Gates even really liked it, gave it a really favorable review.
No, I don't like it.
Yeah.
He's a eugenicist.
Okay. Well, yeah, so...
I'm just messing with you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
of course. That's not even something I would generally use to advertise something. But anyhow, so just for those who that might incite to want to read the book more. But basically, he describes how these cells were naturally based on this free energy there. But eventually, this energy that was present in these vents was catalyzing the reaction between carbons and hydrogens, just naturally creating the first organic molecules, the first molecules that build up life, naturally structured in cells. And then these cells eventually had ways of becoming independent of that proton gradient, which kept them, these protocells, stuck in these vents. Eventually they were able to go out because, think of it this way, that initial proton gradient, the difference in proton concentrations from the alkaline fluid coming from inside the earth, from the ocean water that was meeting on these pores of these vents, tiny pores of rock, holes basically, was the initial fuel energy source, if you will, the spark of life. This was the spark of life, the meeting of fluid from inside the earth with ocean water. And the fluid from inside the earth particularly was charged with infrared light. So life...
Whoa.
So it was used
because of the lava?
Yeah, exactly. From the...
Whoa, dude.
So that's where the flow of it was coming from, the constant flow. So life hasn't always been based on sunlight, to be clear. It started on infrared light from inside the earth. So we are earthlings, but we've used extraterrestrial light to evolve to basically... beyond earthlings. We've evolved to intergalactic or intersolar system, interplanetary beings in some level just by the light we're exposed to. Anyhow, that's sort of some out there thinking. But basically, these primitive life forms left these vents. They were able to free themselves from being dependent on this energy because they had the initial spark to start, and then they were able to slowly to find other molecules to react. Because what happens when what life does, it's like an investor. We put in energy, and I don't know if we discussed this in us talking here today, but basically a living organism with that initial spark puts in energy, finds two molecules that want to react together, but for example, they're bound up in some other formation, and puts in a little energy, breaks them apart, and then they react, and then they're even more satisfied. It's kind of like bacteria just foraging away at some food scraps you left on the ground, or vultures eating the leftovers. That's kind of what life always took advantage of. There's always opportunities. The best is fire. When you have like a leaf or wood or some always hydrogen-based fuel source for fire, whether it's petrol or anything, always hydrogen-based. You put a spark, the spark breaks free some of the hydrogens from their bonds, and then the hydrogen bonds immediately with oxygen, releasing all of that energy. We do this in our mitochondria. Oxygen we breathe, hydrogen we eat from the butter you're eating, the carbs we eat. But we do it slowly and controlled, and we suck all that energy out in order to create a proton gradient in our mitochondria, so we basically, again, you take in hydrogen from food, you breathe in oxygen, the hydrogen donates its electrons, which is sort of like its energy storage component, and then it basically, those electrons hop across these proteins and because they're being sucked by oxygen. But we're like, not so fast. You can't go all the way to oxygen that quick and be happy right away. We're going to suck every little bit of energy out of you on the way. And so every time the electron is jumped from one protein to the next, ultimately being pulled by oxygen at the end of the way, but pulled by each one along the way, that energy that is sucked away from the electrons, which, by the way, came from the sun. The sun when it's shown on those initial plants, the electrons jumped up into an excited state, so we're just bringing it down to a de-excited state, unexcited state through our mitochondria. But so every time the electron jumps down, it goes to a lower state of excitation, and we take that energy and use it to pump protons from inside of the mitochondrial matrix, which is the inner part of a mitochondria, into this intermembrane space, because mitochondria have an inner membrane which is folded, and then an outer membrane and the space in between. So we're recreating that initial proton gradient from the bottoms of the ocean, literally. And then what happens is because there's more protons in this intermembrane space, they want, like, if you imagine, like if this room was packed with a bajillion people, it's going to be hot, stuffy, and you want to get the hell out, right? So what life does is it puts a revolving door where when those people want to get out, it sucks it puts in a battery charging revolving door. So when the people naturally want to leave the room and go out, we're automatically pushing the revolving door and charging, basically generating electricity with the revolving door. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
So it's like natural, just super easy. More here, less here. They want to go down, but we force them to go through the revolving door, which is called the ATP synthase, which is how we make ATP. So that makes it basically a ton of energy. And so that's like just that part I described with the electrons hopping from protein to protein to protein, and the energy is being sucked off of them. When the mitochondria are functioning well with the red light shining on them, the electrons move very, very nicely and smoothly, just like fuel in a working engine with good spark plugs. But when we don't have red light shining on those chromophores, those proteins in the mitochondria, proteins, chromophores, same thing, or chromophores are just proteins that absorb the light, or anything that absorbs light. But so then that process of electrons jumping slows down, and so then we have, again, increased free radical generation, all these problems. Same with the melatonin. Melatonin repairs the mitochondrial DNA, which makes those proteins work properly. So if we don't have as much melatonin, it's also messed up. So it's like blue light at night destroys melatonin, destroys this way. Lack of red light with blue light during the day also destroys it more directly. So it's like I was going through this in the beginning of my talk to get to this point leading us to Father's DNA, going through the steps where eventually there was a merger of these cells. So there was this initial cell. The coolest part, the reason life was constrained for 2 billion years, think about it, for the first, out of 4 billion years of evolution approximately, the first 2 billion-ish years, life could never be bigger than a tiny bacteria, which are so small, they're all over this table, we can't even see them. Why? Because we used these gradients and protons across membrane space in order to provide energy. And so as a circular cell, approximately circular, with only a certain amount of membrane space around the outside, there's only a certain amount of area on which you can generate energy. That's it. And so as you got to a certain size, there's all this volume of stuff in the middle that you kind of have to deal with, and you have to have energy to make that work. But if the membrane's only so big, life reaches a constraint, and that's why life was held for so long, because there was not more membrane on which to generate energy to power all the stuff that was going to be inside and the size of it. So what happened was two primitive bacteria made an alliance, and one basically said, okay, I have, let's say, 1,000 genes, and you have 1,000 genes. I'm really good at making energy, and you're not as good at making energy. So let's do this. I will go inside of you, basically, and then you will take pretty much all of my genes, and I'll just keep the few ones that are absolutely critical to my functioning. And so I'll just give you now, because now that I don't have to, basically the most expensive process in life, this Dr. Wallace described to me, is basically keeping, maintaining, and expressing genes, because protein synthesis is the most expensive process in life. So genes mean protein synthesis. So if you have 1,000 genes, it means way more making of proteins than having 13 genes, because they're the process is always happening. You have genes, they're being expressed, blah, 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 blah. So you cut out from 1,000 genes to 13 genes, you have a lot of energy saved. It's just a ton. So basically this one says, the energy producer basically says, okay, well, I'll give you all of my genes except the ones I need to just basically keep myself going. And then, yeah, you can keep them and then control other pieces of my function as well. And so then I'll just give you all of this leftover energy that I have, and I'm just going to keep what I got. And now, basically, the energy producer's chilling, because all he has to do is just do what he's best at, making energy, and doesn't have to do all this extra work. And then the host cell, now that has it's sort of the master cell that has all the main genes, basically focuses on getting all the food, nutrients, and then handling structure, anatomy, function, and all that stuff. And the other's just I just got to make energy, dope. It's kind of like a business, one person's really good at marketing, one person's really good at overseeing the bigger picture. And so that's the alliance that was made. And so that basically the energy producer became what's mitochondria. And so the cool thing was that with that, there could be hundreds, is what we have today, of these energy producers in one single cell with the nucleus. So instead of having, for example, if you imagine like a room of kids working on a project, if you had each kid doing the same project, like 1,000 kids doing the same project, basically it would be sort of a waste of energy. The same task, the same repetitive task for each of themselves. Whereas you could just have one person do the task and copy it across all of them instead of having them each figure out the tasks themselves. That's what would be the case if mitochondria all kept all their genes, and we wouldn't have been able to evolve so complex. But they made it so that only one, the one who was best at doing the task, figured it out and replicated it across all of the kids in the room, the 1,000 kids. And so now the amount of energy saved that all those other kids could focus their energy on what they do best is tremendous. And so basically the mitochondria, the energy producers, all the other kids in the room focused on just doing one thing they do best, and the one smartest at overseeing the big picture did that, copied it across the rest. So much energy savings, like by hundreds and hundreds fold, massive. Each mitochondria, 1,000 genes versus 13, all of the energy savings is tremendous because you only need one master. So there's basically the slaves and the master. And so from there, life was able to become complex. That's basically it. Think about this. You have so much membrane space now tucked, because mitochondria are just super tight membrane things tucked in this, and that's what allowed organisms to just basically go super big. I mean, even to the size of dinosaurs. It's insanity. Pretty dope. Just that one merger that occurred. But this is why this is so important. Like, people think, the mitochondria, Dr. Wallace, mitochondrial disease, like our existence, like our function in my brain, everything, my thoughts, my consciousness, my level of consciousness, my happiness, my mood, it's powered by the functioning of these mitochondria. How do I know? Because if they didn't merge, we wouldn't even have complex life. And we know that, of course, if you stop breathing, you're going to die. If you take cyanide, which stops mitochondrial function acutely, you die immediately. That's why it's a great poison if you get captured in war, because it keeps the electrons from flowing across the chain. It's kind of like cyanide is like the anti-red light, basically. Red light really? Researchers should use, because cyanide blocks the function of cytochrome C oxidase, which is one of the things that electrons basically jump across the chain. It's one of the basically train stops, if you will, on the train line that an electron follows in the mitochondria. And so if cyanide blocks it, and so we die basically immediately, because that proton gradient that provides that energy to constantly keep us going through the revolving door, people going through the revolving door, it basically, the best analogy is it's kind of like if someone pumped a massive hole in the wall of that room that all those people were trapped in. You were making your energy off of them forcing through the revolving door. If you just basically blast the entire wall down, then everyone can go out every direction and you're basically dead. So that's basically what happens in death in general. And the cell can't hold its light anymore, and so it all leaks out, and that's death. But basically, so red light improves the ability of that, of the electrons to jump across the chain, essentially. So it's super, super dope. But so the reason that goes, so I just really wanted to tell that story so people can understand how foundational this is in life getting complex and everything.
It's the origin of life.
Of life, and complex life in particular, which is why it's so relevant to us.
From the standpoint of mitochondria.
Yeah, exactly. From the alkaline hydrothermal vents, the fluids mixing, the proton gradients leading to the mergers. And Nick Lane, this guy, again, really good books, amazing. But so with the father's DNA, which we were talking about before, some of the mitochondrial genes are directly inherited from the mother. Like the mitochondrial DNA that sits in the mitochondria is only inherited from the mom, because the mitochondria are only inherited from the mom. But there's certain genes in the nuclear genome that were transferred over in that transfer that happened when they basically gave it all to that one master, that do also regulate the mitochondria. So it's not like the only things regulating mitochondria are in the mitochondria. So there's like a sort of mix-over, and between Dr. Wallace, who's one of the leading experts, and Dr. Lane, both of whom I got to meet with, they also sort of disagree. Like Dr. Wallace thinks it's more about the mitochondrial DNA alone. Dr. Lane pointed out to me he sees flaws in that theory, because there's a whole amount of genes in our nuclear genes that also control the mitochondria to some extent. Maybe the ones that just weren't as critical to stay in the mitochondria. That's probably how it worked out. So, like, basically, to answer your question, that this was very long-winded and very well detailed, but the mom's mitochondrial function is pretty critical, because that's what determines how well our mitochondria work. But if you really get crappy genes from your dad somehow, that could also diminish the mitochondrial function. But it is kind of also true, and this is the most fascinating piece. I'm so glad this came up. Wow. People have, it's such an interesting thing that men can have children all the way into their 70s very healthily. Why? Because all the men are donating is the DNA code. Women can't have kids healthily past the age of 30 or 40 because over every decade they live, the mitochondria sitting in their eggs that have to maintain themselves with her energy basically have increases in their mitochondrial DNA percent mutation each decade she's alive, each year as well. So as a woman goes from 14, 13, when we're designed to naturally, even though that's not societally acceptable, when someone goes through natural, puberty and is able to have kids like Romeo and Juliet. Romeo was 17, Juliet was 14, I think. That's kind of like how things were way back when people would have kids, because that's when a woman is healthiest to have children is younger. And this is very controversial because of, or at least this might be controversial because of the way that people view equality between men and women. But of course we can have equal rights, opportunities, and everything, of course, and I think we should. But biologically, we're not the same because women pass down mitochondria. So men can basically, for our entire life, men can, as long as they can ejaculate and get a hard on, men can basically have a child fairly healthily. But women, after 30 and especially after 40, unless they're doing some really serious like meditation and energetic practices, they're super healthy. It's in the modern world in particular, it's uncommon. Women have trouble having kids healthily. And more people in general have trouble having kids healthily because of all the infertility stuff we've spoken about. But does that kind of make sense? Like, so there's such a big gap between, like, again, like men can have healthy kids at 70, but like it's well known, younger a woman has kids, generally the kids are a lot healthier. It's a huge advantage to have kids at a younger age if you're a woman.
So how can so if, say a woman's 35, 30, 40, whatever, wants to have offspring that has juiced up mitochondria and has like a real shot in life.
We should probably get onto the light diet, the 8 steps. I think we've already gone 2 hours.
Yeah. So
because that would be the answer to basically all the questions.
Well, okay. So
at this point in my talk, the audience was like, it was hilarious. So I had 40 minutes initially scheduled, and I got through all the theory. And in the beginning, it was like tough crowd. It's like 4:20 p.m. on a Saturday, second last talk practically. Everyone's like, dead. And so the crowd was really tough in the beginning, especially because I was unpacking like this mega dense material we've talking about in like tight space. But I think it did a great job. I think I almost felt like I never have to give another talk again because it was such a great synthesis. I'm just going to tell people watch it on YouTube because it will be there, thankfully, professionally recorded and all. But at the time, in the beginning, it was so weak. And then by the time we got to the end of the explanation of the theory, I was like, oh, and that's it. And so we didn't get it because my time was up, 40 minutes. And then just like divine providence, they're like, you have 15 more minutes because the other speaker's late. And I was like, wow, that's really funny. So who wants to hear the steps of the light diet? Every single person raised their hands and erupts. Like, yeah, it was epic. Anyway, so I'm presuming the listener is at that point.
This is
listener. If you're at this point, smile.
We're in diehard territory now. We've passed over from the comment, the casual observer. We are like in deep water here. So this is.
I didn't think we'd be able to outdo the episode from 2 years ago. I actually think we absolutely have. I'm pretty stoked.
Yeah.
Especially though, you're so like, I can't believe you've like you're awake, man. I'm impressed.
It's miraculous. We can thank butter for that. So, what I want to the question here begs the answer that so mother wants to conceive. How long before conceiving do they need to like really be paying attention to blue light and getting sun exposure and all of the things that make and doing red light therapy, doing all the things that make your mitochondria
This is a great
kick
question.
ass.
The best way to answer it for me would be like if I met a woman who had grown up in the modern world, which I don't know what I'm gonna. I mean, most likely, like people say, love has a way of its own. So I'll probably meet someone who I really love, regardless of their way they were raised, whether they grew up in the jungle or they grew up in the toxic lifestyle, more like me, and we probably relate more in that case. So assuming I met a woman who I did want to have kids with at some point, who was raised in a way where she was almost as damaged as I was. I would be extremely skeptical about having children with someone who was as damaged as I was mitochondrially. But the thing is, I'm a man, so my mitochondria will never be passed on, no matter how good I make them or how bad I make them. But for women, they have, and all of the eggs a woman has, she has at birth too from her mom. So it's like birth control, terrible. Everything, EMF, computers on the lap, it's destroying all the children she could possibly ever have. Like men, we can remake our sperm. Women, all the eggs that she could ever have babies with are always there from the moment she's born. Super fascinating.
Damn.
Yeah, so like all the damage that a woman does, it is powerful. So like, to be honest with you, I have no idea how I'm going to go about it when I have kids. But let's just say, for theory, it was someone. I would probably say, like, just what comes to my mind now, like a couple years at least, like a couple years. But yeah, a couple of years is what comes to my mind for sure. Because like any less, and you can't really do too much. But it would, for me, it would also be like living in a place where it's like tropical, or at least there's lots of sun, or just super optimal, healthy, very low EMF, super healthy diet, super great. I wouldn't, of course, ever want to control. Like I know we mentioned in one episode or something I've heard, you have had issues with with partners to some extent, like feeling like you want to help them, but like you realize like you can't control someone. Like, so of course I would only ever do this if someone's like 100% on board. But I think a couple years, or at least a year or two, because again, the years pass by and the eggs get more aged. So it's like kind of a fine line, probably I'd say 2 to 3 years of really good work. Maybe even 1 to 2 years, but I wouldn't say any less than 1 year. And this would be if you're in a super optimal environment. If you're in like staying in like a toxic, unhealthy place, it's like you're never going to get to where you could be. But if that's your only choice and that's all you got, like I'd give it like a year, at least year or two. But I'm completely guessing. But like I would say the best indicator would be like only the point at which you feel like you feel amazing every day, then go for it. And it's good because at that point, like if someone feels really healthy and well, if I'm not mistaken, you'll have a really high sex drive. So it's like if you don't have a really high sex drive and you're not like dying to have a kid, you probably shouldn't.
Is there a test that you can get to find out what your mitochondrial function is?
Yeah, heteroplasmy is the term for like the percentage of DNA mutation. And honestly, it would be epic if you interviewed Dr. Wallace and you had just had your followers alone interested in doing this test, because I don't think there's really good tests. No, I mean, they definitely test heteroplasmy in the lab, but I'm guessing it costs like couple grand per experiment, because like the equipment they use, it's like insanely expensive and stuff.
Is there a test for like ATP production?
I mean, honestly, there must be. I don't know. I actually should know this, but I have no clue. Dr. Cruz would be, I'll ask him.
Because that would be interesting, when you're talking about procreating and whether or not you're as optimal as you can be.
There must be. Right? But Dr. Cruz, again, Dr. Jack Cruz, for anyone who's interested, he has a blog called the Redox RX. And Redox is like, when I was saying earlier that mitochondria and life in general uses molecules that want to react but are bound up, like, for example, in the case of wood or leaves and fire, you need the spark to break the molecules free so they can react with the air, the oxygen, and then, again, when they react, releases more energy, breaks more hydrogens free, and that's why fires, like in Malibu, could go from one single spark to like a frickin' entire place burn down, because each time this reaction happens, it creates enough energy to further the reaction. It's self-perpetuating, in effect. And so for our energy generation, yeah, of course, we're using hydrogen and oxygen to do that. And so redox, this term redox, it's redox potential is like the full name. That's what Dr. Cruz uses often as a measure, and people don't understand it. It's essentially overall, all things considered, the ability of us to take hydrogen and oxygen and very effectively generate energy from them. So for example, just by standing in red light from a red light panel for a certain period of time, your redox is higher. Your ability to basically carry out what's called the reduction oxidation reaction, because one of the molecules, oxygen is being reduced, hydrogen is being oxidized. Reduction oxidation. It's named after oxygen because of oxygen's specific strong pull for electrons. It steals electrons and it's oxidized. Same thing that happens when a bike tire rusts. Electrons are being stolen from the bike tire by oxygen. Or the bike chain, pardon. So anyhow, yeah. He has and that would probably be the closest to this. So he has a list of labs that people can like do, And
Oh,
based
so you
on
can-
those labs, he believes, like, again, as the I'd say foremost expert on all this stuff synthesized, based on those labs, you can have a pretty good idea of your redox. But there's no, that I'm aware of, direct mitochondrial measure. But there probably will be in the next like 5-10 years, especially if we get on Dr. Wallace and show there's demand for it. So everyone do that. But yeah, that would be epic. So basically, yeah, it's redox. You want to measure the mitochondrial redox, but again, it's going to be through these different labs. And I don't know even if vitamin D is involved, but I think it's like he takes in a lot of different things. It's a long list. So yeah, I think that's probably the best way. So if you have like really good scores on all those labs, which are what he generally uses, I think, to evaluate new patients anyway, then like maybe it's good to have a kid at that point. And not just within the reference ranges, but like within his reference ranges, because a lot of the time the reference ranges that are standard today, like for male, sperm function is like they've been like reduced over the last decades to the point where like the average man today would be considered infertile by the standards like 60 years ago. Have you heard about that?
No.
Yeah, that's like there's actually a movie called The Disappearing Male, and it talks more about like BPA and stuff. They think it's all about the chemicals. I think that they're missing obviously a huge portion. That stuff's totally related too. But yeah, they mentioned that like literally, I can't believe I remember this, but yeah, every practically decade or 20 years or so, they've been lowering the standards for what constitutes like fertility. I forget it's sperm count. I think it's sperm count.
Wow.
Or sperm motility. But they've been reducing those numbers because like pretty much everyone doesn't qualify. So like imagine like already how much lower functioning the average person is compared to, like guys all the time were talking to me like, this is maybe sort of personal, whatever, but like about how like when they were younger, like like Dr. Cruz, he's joking with me, but like like when he was like when I was younger, like I'd always wake up with like wood, like hardening and whatnot, and like at least I don't personally, but that's again not to say that that's something that's required, but for the like optimal functioning of an organism, but I do know that when I'm in places where I'm like super charged up, like that is more the case. And when I'm in places where I'm like not traveling, whatever, that's not as much the case. So there's like a direct correlate there for like me being more optimal versus me being less. But so yeah, it's clear that, and also same thing, like guys are always like, yeah, like, at this age, like when I was younger, like I wanted to fuck everything that walked. Basically, it was like what a lot of older dudes would tell me, you and Elliot included. But anyway, so yeah, yeah. So basically, I honestly think there's an issue there that's basically like probably not just me, but like a lot of my cohort, my peers, people my age generation are totally screwed from this. And imagine how bad it would be. Like my generation is the last one that grew up like first 10 years of our lives, 14 years without cell phones. Like now it's like from age 2, 3, 4, they're getting cell phones. Like even my little brother's generation is way more messed up. I can see it. A school counselor at my school was telling me about how like he sees that kids are more and more stuck and addicted to their phones, and rates of behavioral issues and like he didn't say autism, but I believe that is increasing too based on the statistics. It is. The statistics are pretty clear. But just behavioral disorders like and issues like total inability to behave themselves, basically like autism, is massively growing. Asperger's, these things. That's mitochondrial brain dysfunction coming from super damaged moms who have bad mitochondria, forcing them to have kids. Like my parents, my mom couldn't get fertile. They used in vitro fertilization, which in 1999, when it was done for me, we discussed this in the last episode, wasn't super common to do in vitro. It was very young. The oldest person ever born via in vitro isn't even 50 years old yet. So it's like super novel. She doesn't look good. Doesn't look particularly healthy. Doesn't mean she's a great example for everyone, but yeah. But so it's barely even known how that affects us. But the whole point is now it's like super common. Like so many people need to do in vitro, and that's like forcing something that should not happen. Like well, let me take that back. That's like to say that I shouldn't be alive, but it's like forcing something that evolutionarily I can admit nature was like, do not like, like, yeah, you're not like healthy. And that's why I had these problems probably as a kid, because my mom's mitochondria were probably pretty shot from whatever it was in her life that affected her. I mean, she's had a ton more stress in her life since having kids. I'm a triplet because of in vitro fertilization. And I have a little brother as well, 2 sisters, same age, and a little brother, younger 2 years. So she had a lot of stress, divorced with my father, stuff like that. So, she has had like 2 different, like, thyroid cancer and some other like issues like practically skin cancer, some interesting stuff. It's not really good, of course. And so that implies that she has had some level of mitochondrial dysfunction from even maybe before the marriage and divorce and stress that probably even triggered that. So it lines up pretty nicely, is the point, that I would have inherited mitochondrial dysfunction. She had us at age 35, which I would say is pretty late for women to have a kid, based on what's healthy. That's 20 years after they're initially designed to begin having a child. Again, I do know someone, though, from Norway who's the wife of this Qigong master. She had one of her last children in her 40s, quite, let's say, late for to do this. But she every day prayed and held always the statue of David from Michelangelo. And when I say her son, a good friend of mine, is looks like David from Michelangelo, and he is such a healthy, amazing, energetic being, it's true. So I think there's ways to skirt this, but just for the general population, if you're not super connected Qigong master in some level, and you're not interested in pursuing that to a very strong extent, then better to be safe than sorry.
Word.
So, yep.
Word is born. Okay.
So shall we talk
Take note,
about...
people, before you get knocked up, you got to get the mitochondria on deck.
Yep. Couple of years in the light diet, which we're going to talk about.
As reward for those diehard badasses that have stuck with us through this epic conversation.
Oh, you know what's funny? Most people who listen to 3-hour episode told me that they re-listened to it at least once to take notes. So I think people can...
Oh, I don't care. I go as long as I got to go.
Yeah, exactly.
I tried in the beginning.
But so people are into it. That's the point.
Well, dude, I tried in the beginning to have hour-long episodes, and it was just excruciatingly stressful to try and cram it in. It just got to go as long as it's got to go.
1.5 to 3 is perfect, because you really can't go more than 3. I mean, come on.
Oh, you'd be surprised.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I've done it. I forget who it was.
Maybe Boros and them. You guys went a long time. No. Anyhow.
Well, let's get into the 8 steps of the light diet, which is not like eating a light snack, but light as in illumination.
Yeah, you actually had come to me and said, I think maybe you should change the name to this sunlight diet. Luke said this to me because then you would know, people might be like, is that the light diet? But it's funny, it fits because based on what I've learned in the last while, if you're living on sunlight, you don't need as much food. That's one thing I've very acutely discovered through a lot of self-poisoning almost, because I was so used to eating large portions of food. So just out of the desire for the pleasure, and naturally having spent a lot of time alone in the last few months and 2 years, I guess, I also have, derived a lot of pleasure from food, much more than is I'd say safe and healthy, and also with my background with sort of food issues, eating disorder type stuff. So I had this desire to always keep eating that amount of food till I'm just really full and stuffed and numb, almost numbing myself with food. Food has always been my drug of choice, where I'll literally eat until I feel like shit. Many times, even since we've had our last conversation. Very not healthy. And this is, and this is more of an emotional thing that I have to deal with. And absolutely, I totally have flaws still in my mitochondrial function, which is something I had mentioned I'd want to discuss. Is I've been traveling, folks, for the last 2 years. I spent first summer after recording that episode with Luke in September, or fall, in Europe. I went back to the States. I was in Mexico for a month. I went to Philly. I lived in Philly for the winter, working on my business. Then I went to LA to be there based on that invitation from our mutual friend. Then I went to Europe for another summer. Then I went back to LA for a fall. Then I went to Mexico for the winter of last year. Then I went to Bali for 3 months. Then I went to Europe for a couple weeks, back to LA for a couple weeks, and a road trip in the States, then to Philly where my family's based, and then back to Europe for the summer, and now I'm here. So literally chronic circadian disruption nonstop, and I can verify and validate that definitely takes it out of the body. There have been many points where my redox is toast, especially after flights. I'm saying, I would eat anything, and I would have headache. I would feel terrible. I'd want to basically die. Not really, but I felt like shit so bad, just from after flights in particular. Not just in general, but when I would eat, which indicates to me that it was definitely a mitochondrial redox issue. Because think about it, you put in that fuel and the mitochondria just can't burn through it. Something's seriously wrong. So I've been driven to think I'm going to try to base myself, set a little more in a sunny place in, Central America, to heal for quite a substantial period of time. That's my current intention. I'm working to manifest. because there's so much appealing things in LA, so many things that are going to pull me talks and opportunities. To stay in one place at this age is hard for me, to be honest. I like getting up, but it prevents me from ever having to go in and address whatever is going on inside of me that's maybe uncomfortable, you know, because it's like, oh, there's a problem, I don't like where I'm at, blah, blah, blah. I don't want, rather than try to build a community or do this, I'm just like, oh, I'll go somewhere new, just change it and not touch whatever was there. So yeah, chronic travel creates chronic circadian disruption, which creates problems. Also, with that, certain cycles in the body don't work as well, like the methionine cycle, which is related to our detox of things like mercury. So I had given the advice, oh, eat lots of seafood. If you're in the sun, you're healthy, you'll be able to detox it. I was in the sun a lot, and I should have a higher vitamin D level also than I do, but because of these factors of travel, circadian disruption, lowers the ability to, one, do things like make vitamin D effectively, but also to detox mercury. So I got my mercury level like much higher than it should have been because I was also eating, some higher level up seafood without taking care of my body's redox. So it was a great lesson I learned, and I'm in the process of detoxing that. Thankfully, it isn't killing me, and I'm not like toxicity dying or feeling terrible. I'm doing quite well at the moment. But so that being said, the light diet has been refined tremendously since starting this, because literally the last episode, the whole 3 hours was basically trying to explain all the steps with no clarity on how to do so. So the first step, which used to be the last step before it was 7, before 8, which is cultivating your inner light, now it is basically sleep with the sun. Step 1, sleep with the sun. It used to be step 7 because it felt like it fit at the end of the day. But then I realized when I was in Croatia just over the summer, this is kind of the last piece of the light diet that had to get locked in. I was always using an alarm to wake up for the sunrise, which is super not good because it's a stressful way to start the day, especially when you don't work at an office. You don't have to. But I was doing it anyway to get the sunrise. The real issue was I just wasn't going to sleep early enough that I would wake up naturally before first light. As per the suggestion of a good friend who's part of the community of people into light rather than just main diet, light in addition to diet, he was like, just try going to sleep an hour earlier, shortly after the sun goes down and see how you do. And I started doing it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. The first night I did it, I went to sleep at 8. I woke up at 3:30 in the morning. Actually, 7:38. I went to sleep 8 to 4. That's 8 hours of sleep. That's pretty good to be up at 4 a.m. And I meditated for like 2 hours, 2.5 hours before the sun came up, which is what the Ayurvedic doctor prescribed to me in a certain energetic fashion. And man, it was amazing. And so I've learned like the key step of the light diet, the reason it's now number 1 before even sunrise being number 1, getting to sleep with the sun and is critical to get up so that, because people are like, oh, do I really have to get up for the sunrise? The key is in getting to sleep really early and not being exposed to a bunch of artificial light. Because again, when you're awake late without the sun powering your body, you're sort of like stressing yourself out. If you're around a bonfire with infrared charging you up, great, like humans would have been if they stayed up late any time, because that was the only light source we would really have after dark. Otherwise, go to sleep. Again, there's all the little caveats that we discussed in the last episode, like you can use orange bulbs and blah, blah, blah if you have to be awake, software on your screen, and blue blockers. The best thing is no lights after sunset and go to sleep, basically, once it's dark. In the winter, that's way harder. So use fire, use candles, really great. Candles generate a lot of infrared. Fireplace at your house, awesome. It'll make you feel so great if you do that. And just like all this stuff. You know all these hacks, but that's basically the gist. And people have heard this before, but do that. Going to sleep with the sunset is pretty straightforward. So, yeah, I think that's the key, and so that you're getting up naturally before sunrise without having to use an alarm. So, is there anything on that needs elaboration, do you feel?
Just how difficult it is for most of us to do so because
great
fun
point.
shit's happening
Thank you,
after
Luke.
dark,
Of course. Yeah, so
and if you're in a relationship, like the chances of you finding someone that's on board with that is difficult.
So
that should be like a first date conversation where you're like, hey, so you just got to know something about me. I'm super into circadian biology, and I like to go to bed very near sunset.
Yeah, exactly. And if it's winter, the sun goes down at 4 or 5, like you're going to be up later. But the key, again, I'll be more specific. The key is to only after sunset use all software you would use, any screens, use blue light filters and make them as red as you can. And then, the issue is when you dim these screens, oftentimes, depending on the software you're using, there's more flicker involved in the screens. So that's problematic because now you're like, it's dimmer, but you're doing flicker even of red light at night. Definitely, I don't think it's optimal. So I generally say avoid screens after sunset. Again, in the winter, if the sun sets at 4, maybe till 6, but definitely I'd say avoid screens like 3 hours before bed, as much as you can. And if you have to use them, wear software, and always wear blue blockers when you are on a screen, even with all the filters, because the software can never eliminate all of the blue from the backlight. And Dr. Wunsch talked about that in his talk too, and I've measured it on my spectrometer as well, because there's a bright white light behind the screen, and they can dim it, but they can't change the spectral. It's just they can't eliminate all of the light with the software.
So even with iris?
Even with iris, you got to wear blue blockers when you're looking at a screen still.
What?
And you'd be surprised. Just put your glasses on in a room with, I literally turn the brightness all the way down and the blue light all the way down on iris with, in a completely pitch black room, and I take blue blockers on, and there's no blue hue in the room, off, and there's like a bluish hue on the walls of the room. It's unbelievable. And my spectrometer confirms this. There's always a little blip of blue, way more than you want. So blue blockers always when looking at screens at night, but generally if you can, just do your work during the day and let yourself be free from screens after the sun sets. It's so great. It's so nice. Books only. And so what I do, just so people know, I never use lights in house, almost never. I literally never. The only light I use is a portable red light headlamp, which is like a camping gear. They all have white light option and red light. So look up red headlamp. Use that. I put it on my head when I'm reading, when I'm walking around, everything. And that's the only way I see. I never use the overhead bulbs, even during the day, because then I just use the natural light coming in from the windows. So that's what I do. And yeah, it's just dark. I just don't turn on any lights during the day or the night. So the red headlamp is a mega win. Candles, if you live somewhere, that's also great. But just not using any blue light after dark is the key. And you will naturally get pretty tired. But if you're looking at a screen with no blue light, it'll make it a lot harder to get tired. So that's why I generally say, if you are going to stay up late after the sun goes down with artificial lights or candles or any kind of light or red headlamp, red light thing, like, just don't use screens. That's probably the best option. And you'll get tired. And you can use like Edison incandescent bulbs, although they're not as good as candles. And people will get tired, and your kids will get tired, and you won't have all these screaming kids you can't put to sleep. That's like the biggest benefit for parents. It's like, why won't my kids go to bed? It's like you're literally like soaking your kids in wake the fuck up serum. And so no wonder they're not going to bed. Duh, you're letting them stare at their iPad. So like, duh. Anyway, also key, I'm so glad you asked this. Other key for sleeping with the sun, no meals after 5 p.m. We already discussed this, but absolutely not. And then from the Ayurvedic tradition, that's one thing. The other thing is 10. And again, the reason I give credence to the Ayurvedic tradition is because after I met this Ayurvedic doctor in Bali while I was surfing out in the water, it's the serendipity. These things just happen. You talk to people, the energy draws you to. Next thing you know, he's just a surfer. Next thing you know, he's teaching me, Ayurveda at his villa, like doing a meditation. I'm visiting him at 5 a.m. to do like a private consultation. It's insane. Like, we're in touch. It's epic. We're going to share a villa in Costa Rica. It's epic. So anyhow, I'm stoked for that. But basically, the 2 rules he gave me, which I think generally apply pretty well, no meals after 5 p.m. ever, and then always go to sleep before 10 p.m., and maximum 2 nights a week, exception. So 10 p.m. every night at the absolute latest, and if you want to do 2 nights per week where you stay up later, fine. But because in their tradition, they believe that, or their research for 5,000 years or whatever has shown that the nervous system doesn't fully regenerate if you go to sleep any later than 10 p.m. So I don't fully know all the science behind their theories, but based on what I've learned and how much it lines up with the light diet, it's essentially like the light diet is basically the Ayurvedic protocols to some extent, but with the Western science behind it now. So yeah, we just want to go to sleep before 10 p.m. But even before 9 for me is the home run.
So that's step 1.
Step 1, go to sleep with the sun.
Step
2, wake up with the sun. Believe it or not. Pretty simple, but naturally we would wake up if you're going to sleep early enough that you're waking up before the sun. That's the goal. So you'll wake up before the sunrise. And right now I'm sort of in a torn period where if you go to sleep too late, Dr. Cruz basically posits that it's best to get up with an alarm if necessary, just not to miss the sunrise, because if you miss it, then your circadian rhythm's shifting forward, and you're going to have not be as tired that night, and then you're going to want to sleep. So it's like you phase shifted it. So in some way, he believes it's better just reset it, and that it's so important to do this to get the sleep and be up for that early change in the light.
Oh,
that you don't want to miss it for even 1 day or 2 days.
I got to ask you something.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if you fucking miss the sunrise for like a few days, it's so hard to get back on it. I got, like, when I moved into the canyon, I have to drive up the hill to get the sunrise, and I started dating someone that doesn't want to go to bed as early as that mostly. So, yes. So I lost the point is I lost the habit of watching the sunrise because now I have to go up the hill to see it. In my last apartment, I just could like stumble onto my balcony and I had a perfect.
Dude, you did have a great
I had
shot.
a perfect
but
eye
also
line.
you had a direct eye line at the cell towers.
Burn.
So I think you're.
Yeah, so I'm winning, overall. But anyway, what I wanted to ask you was, sometimes in LA, believe it or not, it's actually quite foggy in the morning, so you can't see the sunrise. Dude. So is it still worth me like going up the hill in my car and like looking at a sunrise that I can't see?
I don't think so, because it is worth being up for it, going to sleep early enough that you're up for it. But just going outside, because basically the clouds are scattering all the light equally. So if you just walk out on your front door, you just look up and it's basically the light will incline. So pretty much.
Okay, cool.
Unless there's like on the coast, a lot of the time there's clouds on the sky, but there's a little piece between the horizon and the clouds where you will see the sun. Yeah. But I know that's not the case with the June gloom in LA.
Yeah.
Which, I was surprised when I actually went the first time there in May. I was like, Jesus, this sucks.
Yeah.
But in the fall, then it was amazing the whole time.
Yeah, you're like, this doesn't look like Baywatch. Wait a minute.
Exactly. And also, like, I got there in May, and the first thing I was like, can I go in the ocean? And I walked out of the ocean. I'm like, dun, dun, dun. I was like, I was like screaming in pain. It was so cold. I mean, I could actually do the CT, but it was really off-putting in May. I was like, Cali should be like sunny and hot year-round.
Yeah.
I'm surprised SoCal isn't like that, like I expected. Cool thing in the Santa Monica Mountains in LA, at the highest point where I would go, where I would watch my sunrise every day in Malibu, it's like an hour drive from LA, hour and a half actually from LA. But even when it was June gloom, dude, I was always in the sun because it's 2,000 feet above LA. So up in the like region up there, it was pretty epic. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, if you ever are like super gloomy in LA and you need sun, you can always go up to. It's called God's Seat. It's a rock formation. It's like super beautiful. It looks out on the valley, on like Newbury Park and that kind of thing. Super dope. Anyhow, but like Thousand Oaks kind of. Anyway,
right.
Westlake Village is the direct what it's looking at. Okay, so there's rise with the sun. I hope that answers. That's a great question actually for people because I wouldn't have thought to do that. But yeah, if it's cloudy, that's what you do. But you want to be awake naturally because that means your circadian rhythm's firing. So waking up with the sun, basically. This is all repetition, but we'll do it anyway. The signal from the sun, not only are all the benefits from sun gazing with just basically pure red and infrared light, but it's like photobiomodulation, like the Juve and the red light panels to the max, super maxed out, because it's like the whole infrared and red spectrum basically coming at you directly from the sun, and it's really, really, really powerful. It's really beneficial. So, there's all the research on the strengthening the pineal gland and improving vision. So sun gazing alone is beneficial from the ancient knowledge, but also once the UV light comes in after, depending on where you are on Earth, between like 15 minutes after the sun comes up, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, even more in the winter in certain places, that UVA turns off certain hormones that are initially stimulated by the rising of the sun. And so that's super important. So we want to be out quite a lot in the morning, and that leads into... Well, let's say any questions on waking with the sun? Leading into step 3, which is sunbathing and living outdoors during the day. So in general, because of what we discussed earlier, very, very well, to my surprise, because of you want to live outdoors as opposed to inside behind glass, because then more infrared, near infrared, far infrared light, even on a cloudy day, you're still getting the full spectrum, powering your mitochondria full on. Not as much infrared because it's filtered by the clouds, but still, you're getting powered by the sun. And so we want to just be outside, just even if you're under an umbrella or a balcony or at a cafe under the awning, but like you're still the full spectrum of light, believe it or not, is still hitting the eyes. Dr. Ott, the researcher in his book Health and Light, one of Wunsch's teachers who we mentioned earlier, who researched those chlorophyll, chloroplasts, and the cells that are in our eye that act similarly under the influence of full spectrum light, they work way better. He also found that he had arthritis, really severe arthritis actually, for a long period of time. And he tried to solve his really severe arthritis by going to Florida and sunbathing his hip with the full spectrum of sunlight. And sure enough, the arthritis in his hip didn't improve with the bathing of the sun on his hip. But what happened was his sunglasses broke on the trip that he was on. And so when his sunglasses broke, his arthritis disappeared.
Oh,
So
damn.
sunbathing his hip didn't work, but his sunglasses broke and his arthritis and his hip went away. So it shows that obviously the full spectrum of light coming through the eye has all these hormonal effects via the hypothalamus, which is the part of the brain that's those intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells are directly wired to for all these energetic signals that drive. The hypothalamus is like the master of everything in the body. It contains the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which controls the circadian rhythm. It's the master clock keeper. It also contains the leptin receptor, which is the master obesity keeper, which is all messed up in the case of obesity. That's why people keep eating forever. And so then the hypothalamus also controls like basically the whole endocrine system. So all the glands that secrete all the hormones, from the adrenals to the thyroid to the pituitary gland in the brain. It's totally the testes. It's epic.
So if people think they have adrenal fatigue, or like if a woman's hormones are all jacked up, the root of it is probably light.
Absolutely. And that's so funny because there's all these people like in the supplement business and all this. Like last night I listened to someone talk about supplements for quite a while, the discussion after I left, this founder of the supplement company. And basically I was like, okay, he's probably right about a lot. He knows a lot. You know, he's an expert in his field. But like missing the light perspective is very, very a shame because what light does, and this was the actual Latin quote on the end of Wunsch's slide, which no one asked him what it meant, but I did. And it means light moves matter. And that's like, I don't know why he had it there. It was symbolic. I don't know why he even put it because no one was going to know what it means in Latin. But literally, like matter is just still, but light is what gives it the energy to move. And so every pathway, every system in the body, when we get the full spectrum of light, not only does light break apart the proper chemicals so they can become whatever they need to become, as we discussed, and vitamin D, best example, absolutely. But also, it just generally like keeps things moving by charging ourselves, by charging the water on ourselves, the infrared light from the sun, you know, structuring the water like the fourth phase of water. Have you interviewed Gerald Pollack?
Well, I was going to on this trip, but sadly his wife passed, and so he wasn't able to make it.
Yeah, so that's obviously very disappointing. God bless him and his family. But anyhow, he's done monumental work on the subject, you know, showing that the infrared light from the sun, or not from the sun, but infrared light charges water, structures it up. And so basically in our body, like that's huge. And then when you add UV light on top of already structured water, it creates like a mega charged water. And so it's just, when I read this, when I was on my exchange program in Bosnia, which we discussed as part of my story on the last show, I was like, my jaw was dropping. That whole day, my jaw was dropping. I was like, this is how life works. Infrared light charges the water that makes up our cells, and then when you add UV light, it creates like a super mega battery. But the UV only works if you've already had the infrared light, which is one of the reasons also Dr. Cruz and other people say for sunburning, it's critical to get that morning light, which is free of UV and rich in infrared, all across your skin. Again, it's like if we grew up or if we lived in the past world like Northern Europeans, in the summer we would have had this all the time, and then in the winter it would have been mostly gray days, but we've gotten so much vitamin D throughout the summer with our white skin that lets us make it way faster than people with dark skin that we're adapted to that low light condition. This is very interesting and absolutely controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway because it's biophysically accurate. People who are, this is amazing, people with really dark skin from places like Ethiopia and Somalia, the darkest skin that it can get, which is where humans originally came from, which we probably all had that skin actually in our evolutionary period, and we depigmentate basically. Have you ever noticed someone with really dark skin like that living in Europe and they have yellow eyes? The whites of their eyes have turned yellow. That's called jaundice, and the reason, as far as my understanding goes, and babies often are jaundiced, and they put them under a blue light because the blue light has high energy to break apart this molecule. I believe it's called bilirubin, which is what causes jaundice. And so that's another molecule that light breaks apart in our body, the right frequencies, and renders it harmless. But when we get too much, we're basically screwed. So people who move from Africa, super dark skin, they need way more light, to Northern Europe, their eye whites turn yellow because they can't possibly get enough sunlight to do this process the way it's designed to be.
Wow.
So they get jaundice, basically.
Wow.
Jaundice, yellow eyes. So this is like how important this is. But as white Northern Europeans, we're designed to be in the low light. So yeah, basically people with really dark skin, there's always got to be context about sunbathing and how to build up your sun exposure, which we haven't touched on. But this is why it's so important for step 3 to live outdoors during the day. We've already talked about this. But
what do people do when they live somewhere hella cold where it's, there's snow on the ground?
So you
and
get
it's
tons of sun in the
18
summer
degrees.
naturally, and then in the winter you're taking advantage of the cold effect. Like there are certain fish and animals that literally they like freeze still in cold water, and they stay alive, basically frozen for the entire winter. Literally, they are solid, basically frozen the whole winter, but they're still living. It's fascinating. So basically, humans, we don't freeze, we don't even hibernate, but we live in the cold, and we basically take advantage of the cold benefits because the cold causes the mitochondria to generate more infrared light via super interesting, but cold. This is what Dr. Wallace explained to me. Definitely ask him about this when you do the mega mitochondrial interview. But basically, cold on the skin activates surface cold receptors, talk to the brain, from the nerves to the brain. And the brain says back, okay, it's cold as shit. Turn on the uncoupling proteins in the mitochondria. So these uncoupling proteins in the mitochondria basically take that revolving door energy generation process, and they poke another revolving door in the wall. But instead of using the energy of all those people packed tight in a room, in other words, all the hydrogens packed tight in the intermembrane space to generate just ATP, now it spins another revolving door, and all that energy is just released as heat instead of electricity. That's what these uncoupling proteins are. And in the process, it's massively upregulating the amount of fat that's being brought to the mitochondria to be oxidized so that we have the hydrogens to power the energy. It's fascinating. That's why Wim Hof method works so well. So basically, what do we do when it's cold? We Wim Hof method all winter long, and then we're super healthy. And it's clear, even Wim Hof, like without the light focus, although he does, by nature of going outside, get people into the light a lot more, because you can't really do like natural cold bathing indoors. I mean, you can a bit, but it's not as effective naturally. But so basically, we Wim Hof, if people know in the common terminology, Wim Hof it all winter long, and then you're going to be super healthy. Because like the point I was making is, even without the light, he's still curing diseases with just one piece of the light diet. Well, several actually. The cold, cultivating your inner light, and breathing techniques, which we've hardly talked about, but actually, take it back. We've talked about oxygen and its role in the mitochondria more than anyone else has ever talked about oxygen and its role in the mitochondria on a podcast ever. Factually. No one has ever gone this deep on a podcast ever.
So if the cold is stimulating mitochondria,
uncoupling proteins, yeah.
Uncoupling proteins, which has the net effect of allowing the mitochondria to create more ATP.
Infrared light, not ATP.
Okay.
So it does ultimately have the net effect of allowing us to create more ATP, because that infrared light, according to Dr. Kruse, based on his research, that infrared, just like Dr. Pollack has researched, structures the water around the mitochondria, which actually compacts the mitochondria biophysically, which basically keeps those spark plugs, the ignition system, tight together, all those proteins, so the electrons can flow very nicely. It's kind of like electrons on a ball track, like balls on a ball track that a kid puts together, where like the pieces are like all apart and the electrons are going to drop off and not go very quickly, get stuck. But if it's all tight, all the pieces are tight, it flows very well. So, yeah.
Question for you then. What do you think in terms of order? My morning routine is meditate at the biocharger, charge up the cells, then I get on the Vibe plate in front of the Juve Elite, just the massive, big-ass one. And then I do an ice bath, 35 degrees or so, for around 10 minutes.
Is this after sunrise or before sunrise?
After sunrise.
Okay.
Then after that, then when I'm super cold, then I work out, and then the morning's over. Do you think I should do the red light before or after the ice bath? I do it before because I want to get warm before I get in the ice bath, because it's just easier to get in when I'm like warm from the Vibe plate and the red light.
I don't know. I'm inclined to think that it would be better to do it after, but I think that applies more to sunlight exposure, because when we cool the surface of the skin, it allows us to better take the UV light. But infrared light already penetrates super deeply through our skin. So like, I would be inclined to just say do whatever feels the most intuitive to you, which it sounds like
sometimes I do both. Sometimes even if I have the time, I'll do the ice bath, then I'll go back and do the red light a little bit, and then
my inclination would be say, like, to be honest, would be like do all that stuff before the sun comes up, except the light. Actually, no, you wouldn't want to get an ice bath probably before the sun comes up either, because
brutal, dude.
Yeah, exactly. No, that would be rough. But it's brutal. It's brutal, but it's because the mitochondria haven't like turned on properly. So like to do that.
Well, I do take a cold shower before any of this happens.
Okay, actually,
that's the very
right.
first thing I do.
Yeah.
And then I used to fast. I'd only have like a fatty coffee and basically, like go kind of fat adapted keto and then eat like maybe at 4 o'clock. But then after Jack was like, dude, you're playing yourself. You need to eat a super hearty breakfast first thing when you wake up. So now, I can't.
I'm not sure about that, by the way. I mean, I'm going to trust Jack because he's been so right about this. Is literally, just to be clear on credit, this is majority his work. I'm just doing my best to make it really understandable, which I think in ways people can relate to.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm inclined to say, like, I think he's probably right about that. But at the same time, the Ayurvedic tradition is to eat like a light breakfast, but then a very hearty lunch when the sun is the strongest and the metabolism is the most active, because you'll burn through it the faster. Because they say that the pitta energy, which is fire energy, is strongest with the sun because it increases with the sun. And the pitta energy is how we burn through food. And you know what's funny? Pitta is like this fire in Ayurvedic, I guess. It's probably the same synonym for redox potential. Like in a day, the body's redox ability to do this reactions of burning food goes up as the day goes on, and then down after, like up towards midday and down after that. So yeah, so like from my experience, again, having acutely experienced what like low redox is and knowing what's going on after the flights and the travel and disruption of circadian rhythm, man, eating a big breakfast would make me feel like shit really bad. And I'm pretty sure I knew why. It was because my redox was low. I couldn't burn through it. So I'm like just loading myself up. It's like putting tar into an engine in a way. Or just putting good gas into an engine that's not running.
Let me
I think optimally we would eat the big breakfast and be able to burn through it.
Clarify that. Actually, the routine I'm on now is do the meditation, and I don't eat or drink anything before that because you don't want to be spending energy digesting anything. You want to be dropping into a transcendental
that's for
place,
sure.
right? So that's empty stomach. But then I'll drink my coffee on the Vibe plate on the red light. Then I'll ice bath. Then I'll work out because I want to work out in a fasted state with caffeine because I forget why.
Well, if you've had butter, you're technically not in a fasted state. If it's butter coffee.
Yeah. Well, I've had fat.
Okay, fat.
But
so you're in a ketogenic state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then I go inside and have a big, it's not even, I don't know, I wouldn't even count it a meal, but I'll have like a protein smoothie, like bone broth protein, some brain octane oil, 6 egg yolks.
Pretty good routine.
You know, that's the deal.
You're charging the brain up. I think it sounds pretty good. I mean, I should probably tell people my routine. Like mine is currently, it's wake up as best of my ability. Again, going to sleep with the sun, waking up naturally before sunrise. With the travel, I've been testing how I feel, letting myself sleep until I wake up naturally and not using an alarm to force the wake up. If I'm up, say, till like last night till like 1, talking with all these awesome people from the summit.
Which again, we're going to be tonight, dude.
Probably.
It's 9:40 and we haven't eaten dinner.
I have a flight in 12 hours to Austin, Texas, so I'm not eating dinner, that's for sure, especially with the flight tomorrow. I did mess it up the last 2 nights for the dopamine benefit of the community, which, again, I've been alone on a Croatian island for the last month. Poor me, right? But so I haven't had meals with people, so I was like, you know what, I'll have some meals at 7 or 8 p.m., 9 even with the group, but I would not do this in a normal routine. The key is what you're doing in your regular routine.
Right.
So, to be clear, I'm getting to sleep with the sun, waking up with the sunrise. This is pretty much my morning routine I'm describing. I'll meditate before the light comes up. Even before that, I'll take a hot shower and then end on cold. So first thing, I brush my teeth and scrape my tongue, Ayurvedic style. Once the mouth is clean, then I drink a half liter of water to get hydrated. And then I will eliminate. So ideally, the bowels would be ready to move at this time of the day. But if they're not, I'll just urinate. And then hot shower, cold shower to end. And I get really cold. I love freezing. And then I will meditate. Now I'm in a great energetic state after the shower especially. Meditate until basically the sun's coming, and then watch the sunrise. But the number of days I've actually stuck to this out of the last month is maybe not even half. So that's like ideal. But because of the movement, I haven't been as tight on it. But always, without failure, I'm getting up and getting light on me, and generally putting in time to meditate as much as I can bring myself to. So, yeah, but the light is like the one factor that really doesn't go away. And then I'll have breakfast after the sun rises. But I'm still torn, like, once I get my redox really much sharper, I think, having the big breakfast would be kind of the right move. But for now, I'm a little lighter because I don't want to just not feel well because I have low redox. It's like, I know it would maybe be better, but I've destroyed my function to some level. So I am not going to put more, let's say, gas on the fire and hurt myself and make myself be miserable when I know that eating a big breakfast I'll feel sluggish.
Word.
So that's kind of the idea.
What's step 4?
Step 4, well, so actually, other part of step 3 is sunbathing. People kind of get this, but we've already built this up. But like, you need to build up 5 minutes, 10 minutes per day. So it's kind of 2 steps in one. But like, live outdoors during the day and build up your sun exposure. But the sunbathing, besides the circadian reset of the sunrise, sunbathing is like when you build your redox the most. That's when you get the infrared and the ultraviolet to supercharge up the cells. That's like photobiomodulation from a red light panel times a million. Literally, it's uncomparable. It's like photobiomodulation on like mega steroids, like Barry Bonds, like way over the top. Funny side note, I was like super young. My mom and my family was going to San Francisco for just to visit my aunt and uncle. My mom bought tickets to the Giants game like way ahead of time. The night we showed up, out of all the nights for the baseball game, happened to be the night Barry Bonds was about to hit the record-breaking home run. So I got to be like 10 years old and watch Barry Bonds hit his 756 home run. But they found out he was on roids later, so it kind of killed my being stoked about being there for the home run. But anyway, so step 4, now that people have got the sunbathing. Again, listen to other podcasts I've done where we get in-depth on that stuff. Yeah, so step 4 is eating seafood, because consumption of seafood allows us to assimilate light better. Simple. DHA. But again, mercury discussion, avoid higher up seafood. Eat like mackerel, sardines, and shellfish are the best. This is what powered evolution of the human brain, and we went deep on this in the last episode. So consume seafood, but especially shellfish, lower on the food chain, especially if you're not optimal, which most of us aren't, and able to detox the mercury as well. So avoiding swordfish, tuna, farm-raised fish, and farm-raised salmon, and so on. Wild-caught and lower like sardines and that stuff. So mackerel, herring. So that's pretty much step 4. Step 5 is consuming water that is unfluoridated and toxin-free. And Luke, you have an episode on that. You talk about that all the time. Lower in deuterium is great. Deuterium-depleted water is epic, but we don't really have time to get into that. But there's episodes on that, and we can touch on it in a future episode. So, yeah, good water, done. That, in short, like the seafood allows us to assimilate light better because we put it in our cell membranes and so on. And when UV light hits DHA, this fatty acid molecule from seafood, which is the reason why I would eat it, in addition to all the other minerals and so on that are in shellfish in particular, that are specific for the human brain, because it's what led us to evolve from apes, easily accessible food at the coast. That basically, the light causes like an electric current in the seafood, and basically it charges up our cells, simply put. The water, if it's good quality, it stores the light energy better, whereas if it's full of fluoride, it's going to do all these negative things, plus we can't have that 4th phase as effectively when it's full of all kinds of chemicals, and it's not as alive as the water you drink and so on. So yeah, there's a problem there.
With the water piece, I was going to ask Gerald Pollack if my homemade EZ water was legit, because I have the Vitalizer, which spins the water, vortexes it using a magnet, and then I have this new Juve panel. I don't think it's out, but it's like, I don't know, 2 times as big as the Go. It's like about a foot tall. Mm-hmm. It's pretty potent, and it has a timer on the side. So, and the Vortexer has a timer, and I set them both for 20 minutes, and I just blast that spring water with the red light while it spins, and then I immediately put it in a dark refrigerator. And I was going to ask him, am I making? I mean, it's not like the gel exclusion zone water. It's not the 4th phase of water, but am I making the water more chronic?
Yeah, I couldn't say. I mean, from what I've gathered, like as long as the water's toxin-free and pretty living, of course, lower deuterium water is great, and people can listen to the Boros episode to understand why. It's very expensive, though, and hard to find often. But if you just go in the sun after drinking good quality water, I think that's, as far as I understand, like the way to really do it.
You'll make it in your body.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and so, like...
or a sauna.
There's probably infrared sauna.
Yeah.
Far infrared, I don't think far infrared has the same effect on structuring like a steam sauna, but near infrared, which is, I think, I should know what I
did, dude, since I last saw you?
I could take that back. I'm not sure about which far or near, but yeah, sauna and Juve probably would have some benefit, but the sun is way better.
Since I last saw you, I've always had the clear light sauna, my favorite, and it's full spectrum, meaning it has near, mid, and far. But some of the panels are stronger than others, and I like it to get hot super fast, and you have to heat it up, and if I forget about it, the timer goes off, and it's annoying. So Brian at Sauna Space sent me one of his big-ass, badass incandescent near-infrared bulbs. Yeah. And it's on a little piece of wood, and I put that inside the sauna.
Oh, man.
And it cranks up super fast, and dude, I mean, I warm it up maybe 15 minutes. I get in there, and his light's so close to me, combined with all this really great these really great, the clear light ones that come in the sauna, but the combination of the two, and then I'll take his light and shine it on like my joints that hurt, and I'll shine it on my thyroid and my face and my scalp.
I think that's probably really good, yeah.
Dude, it
Definitely.
is next level,
I got to come to your
bro.
biohacker lounge.
It's next
I'm going to be
level.
in Vegas at like an optical fair, and I was like, I'm going to stop traveling. I'm going to go to Mexico and settle in the sun. But I'm in Vegas in like 4 or 5 days. So.
I'm sorry, you have to go to Vegas.
Yeah, I know. If it's an optical fair, yeah,
it was
it's really
brutal,
close.
bro.
I'm going to be inside so much more there. But
the new sauna
I'll
configuration, point is, you
works.
sweat balls like
Great.
5 minutes in there, and you're just like pouring.
That's healthy.
And then Brian also sent me, he has like this big wood panel that has 4 bulbs. I tried to put that in my sauna, blew my power out. Yeah, so I blew all the breakers, so I can't do that yet. I got to, when I move into my own house and I can dial in the the capacity of the breaker box and stuff, I'll change that.
Dude,
but
this has been insane. So all right,
but it's rad. What's rad is going in the ice bath and then standing in front of Brian's big incandescent 4 light thing, because they're so hot and they just light you up and they penetrate so deep, and you don't have to be inside a sauna. It sits there. I'll just like leave it next to me when I'm doing the biocharger. Some next level shit.
Light penetrates very well.
Yeah, that's dope.
Deep penetration is tremendously beneficial in the body.
All right, where are we? Are we on 6?
We are on 4 and 5 were seafood and drinking good water.
Yeah.
Step 6 is to bathe in the cold, and we've discussed the reasons for this at length, so I don't think we need to go into that. But absorbing more light by cooling the skin.
Baby.
Exactly.
Luke,
his Instagram pictures are amazing. The one yesterday, I think, I was so stoked. It was so beautiful.
Yeah.
In the ice. That's like super extreme.
Well, that one I had a photo shoot at my house, and I, my cold chest that I made, which if you guys want plans for it, just Google Luke Story, Ben Greenfield ice bath, because I gave Ben my plans and all the photos and links and stuff, and he did a blog post because I'm too lazy and busy to ever make a blog post about it. So if you guys want my ice bath, which is it's a Sears chest freezer that's all dialed in with grounding and all this cool shit.
Yeah. Guys, if anyone knows really, really good assistants, I think Luke needs some good assistant help. So you can even email me or
you'll screen them for me?
I mean, I'm looking
They're gonna have to take the
actually, anyone who's made it this far, I'm serious, you're probably really smart. I'm looking for a really good assistant. So not to like take advantage of the time, but actually to take advantage of this opportunity.
Hit him up.
I need a really good assistant, people who are really responsible. So yeah, we will do a talk, and Luke and I are actually both in desperate need of really good people. So if you've made it this far, you're really good people. Hit me up. I can't believe I'm doing this. Actually, you should email support@rawoptics.com, and then you'll come our way. Yeah, I can't give my email on this episode. That would be suicide. I'll be dead.
Is someone still with us at 2 hours and 56 minutes?
Oh, man. We're going to pass the last
They should
episode.
Get some kind of prize, honestly.
Not my email. Sorry.
Maybe the prize is getting a job for you.
In a river after having to deal with this. Anyway, okay.
Back to the ice bath.
Ice bath, yeah, my man.
So I have the plans on Ben Greenfield's blog. Luke Story, Ben Greenfield Ice Bath.
It's really good.
You'll find it, okay?
And while you're there, you can listen to my podcast from the 21st of September, The Light Diet.
That photo that you saw, my ice bath doesn't make ice. It just gets 35 degrees, and I have the timer set right so it never makes ice, because then I have to break the ice with the kettlebell, and it's annoying. But for the photo, we went and bought a bunch of ice and filled up my cold chest with ice just to make it look dope. But truthfully, I do actually like taking an ice bath with the water and the ice. Is my preference.
Even better because there's more cold. Dr. Cruz, when he did his CT protocol, which he used to lose all this weight, he would take ice in the plastic bags and put it on his chest around his fat areas to trigger even more fat burning.
That's how I first started doing it, was from his blog.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
Yeah,
Likewise, that's what got me into him.
I'd go to 7-Eleven. I think I got like a compression shirt or something so I didn't burn my skin.
It's the whole steps. That's how I did too. But he would do it the next step was in the water with the ice bath if you have targeted weight loss you want to achieve. Ooh. It's like the cold, they have Zeltic. It's the metal plates they used to literally cool fat off. It's kind of like a hack, but the thing is, if you don't fix the fundamental circadian rhythm and hormonal imbalances, then you'll just do that, pay all this money, and then get fat again. Basically, that's the problem. Right. So, but it'll work temporarily. Step 7. This is getting really interesting. It is avoid non-native man-made electromagnetic radiation, because you do all this stuff to put in the charge and help to better absorb the charge with the seafood and the cold and the water, and then you get the sun and you charge up, and you're avoiding the fake light at night, which is one of the things you do to avoid discharging all your charge. But the same thing comes along with this, which is avoiding man-made EMF. That's like discharging the charge in the body. And so therefore we want to avoid it. And the biggest step on that is not living in major metropolitan cities with 5G coming on. And so that's like really like that's like number one. And then like way down the list is like, of course, turning your phone on airplane mode and avoiding Wi-Fi, hardwiring with Ethernet. Because again, EMF basically alters the voltage-gated calcium channels in the cell, of which I am not a particular expert. Tons of research on it. People who think that's woo-woo, just know that the research done by the industry shows no effect from EMF. Surprise, surprise. But the research done by non-industry researchers shows very significant effects, and therefore make your own decisions.
Just internet web search. Don't use the internet web search that starts with G, because we all need to boycott those evil fuckers
for cutting everyone's traffic in the health world. I didn't know about that until this
event.
It's really bad.
They're demonic. And
so does this mean people shouldn't use the G Chrome either?
We have to make them pay. We have to make them pay.
Yeah. Did they hit you too?
I don't know. Maybe Apple might have, because I did an episode about the V word. Not the fun V word, but the V word that involves shots in your little baby.
Oh, jeez. Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. The V word. Oh, man. The shots in your baby.
Anyway.
Yeah. So that's step 7 is avoiding EMF. There's tons of resources on this where people listen to the last episode seriously. And step 8, the best. I actually spent the step 1, the change from being 7 to 1, the sleeping with the sun.
I was going to say I got off on the evil G, but what you want to web search is cancer clusters. Just put cell tower cancer clusters, and then tell me they're safe. See what you find.
Yeah. Hopefully Luke isn't found like dead in a river or something.
Yeah, right.
Talking about this stuff.
It's like all those naturopath doctors that disappeared in the past couple of years.
I'm pretty concerned.
Luckily, I don't have a medical license, so I'm not as susceptible to that kind of torture.
Yeah. So,
step 8.
Step 7, that, and then step 8 is I was spending. From October of last year until this summer, I was trying to refine this one because there's lots of things that I knew had to be included in the light diet, but I didn't know how. So these include reading good books, cutting bad people out of your life because they literally biophysically steal your light, and then keeping good people in your light like the ones you're with, and you feel their warmth and their glow, and they just make you feel great. They're donating like biophotons to you. It's epic. Speculation based on really, really good research. That's to be clear. Dr. Wunschap, actually, I was like, I don't like making claims, but I'm really not 100% sure about the science. He's like, listen, this is how science works. It's just good practice to declare when there's speculation versus hard facts. And there's mostly hard facts here, and I've declared when there's speculation. So you can feel this. I mean, that's it. It's already cliche. Everyone knows it, but there's biophysics to it. And there's physics and biophysics to everything in the universe because it underpins everything. So rather than being like, oh, it's just woo-woo, it's like, no, there is a physical effect going on when someone makes you feel like shit versus someone makes you feel amazing. It's just like either we understand it so far or we don't understand it yet. So, yeah, and the research is clear. It's light. It's energy. So, other things included in this besides reading good books are like Qigong and meditation. And so the name I finally came to for all this when I realized what we talked about earlier, that we are a soul, it's cultivate your inner light. That's step 8. And this was actually how we started the episode. We briefly brought it up. But you cultivate the inner light with all these things. And so, I mean, because you follow Dr. Cruz, you naturally already do all the things on the light diet and even more. But these are like the key fundamental tenets. Women, if you want to have a child and improve your mitochondria, anyone who wants to get better. Again, one of the biggest steps that's hard to be underpinned is 7, and particularly the piece of it, avoiding major metropolitan cities in the modern world, especially if you're sick with a disease, like if you have an indoor job and you're sick and you're in a big EMF city, like it'd be super, super hard to hack it. Like if you're super into like Qigong and energy practice and you do everything to the max extent that you can, you'll probably have huge benefits, but it's possible you won't be able to, you'll hit a certain like glass ceiling, I guess, a certain like limit that within your current present environment that you just can't pass. So that's why like moving to a place with more sun, at least for one winter or a couple winters, at which point you might be optimal enough to get into the cycle. Wunsch also made me a bit concerned about the idea that Jack has presented of moving somewhere to the tropics with chronic sunlight when you're a Northern European who's like always had like winter, summer, which, like there's certain, I think like plants and things that, they when they haven't had like the proper winter, they can't thrive in the proper summer. So it's like I'm almost concerned of this following the sun idea, at least at my age, when I'm still growing and developing. I might want to heal myself in a sunny place and then go somewhere low EMF but with winter, so that I can get that seasonal variation of at least a bit of cold. It doesn't need to be snowing and freezing.
That's interesting.
Fascinating. But I trust Wunsch so much on these subjects.
I don't know what I am. I mean, I'm technically European, but I'm kind of dark. You know what I mean? Like
yeah, but you'd be in northern. I mean, only like people who, like white people, if you have white skin, you must have descended based on the research from like the Caucasus, like the Ural Mountain area in Russia, or like northern Europe, like the Norway, Germany. Even Italians are much darker skin, so maybe you're more Italian.
I am, yeah.
So on. Have you done 23andMe? Like you've seen your gene breakdown?
No, I haven't done it, but I know
just
basically
use different names. So the G word doesn't own your genetic data.
No
they
shit.
own mine. Toast.
I know those dickweeds. No, I haven't done it. I just know from being around when my grandparents were around and interviewing my parents about the lineage and stuff. But
That's
most
good.
Italian and English. But I guess. When you look at me, I look like a white guy, but when I look at myself compared to a guy like you, I feel
you
like
have
less
definitely
of
more
a white guy.
Southern European for sure. Southern European, because I'm Irish. Funny note on me being Irish. I just love this because I learned this today. How stoked am I? So I have an American passport because I'm American, but I also have an Irish passport because my grandma's from Dublin. But how get this, with Brexit, so the UK is losing all the benefits of being part of the EU. Like if you UK and you want to work in Spain, Germany, anywhere in European Union, Lithuania, Poland, Hungary, whatever, Croatia, Greece, you have to now apply for citizenship residency in those countries, at which point you'll probably be able to have the benefit of going around Europe freely like they can. However, so Britain can't get all those benefits. And likewise, if you're a European living in Britain, you're going to have to basically do, like if you came to the States, like get British residency, although they'll probably make it easier. But there's one country, Ireland, because of the Northern Ireland debacle, the whole issues they've had with the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland and the Protestants and the Catholics, basically, they want to have what's called a common travel area where like they never build a border, like an official border between Northern Ireland, the United Kingdom, and Ireland, again, because there's so much killing and slaughter. Probably when you were younger, I wasn't really alive for it. So much animosity, and so they don't want to put a physical border because it'll create problems. So basically, on the side of the EU stuff, Ireland and the UK made a deal that they will still maintain their own deal, like EU style, separate from the EU, so that they never have to build a border at this point between Northern Ireland and Ireland. But what that means is me, as a person with a passport from the Republic of Ireland, I have the benefit of both being part of the Irish UK, meaning I could go to the UK, stay as long as I want, do whatever I want, work here, live here, whatever, because of that, and the benefit of the EU. So now I have the strongest stack of passports in the world, the US and the Irish passport. And again, if you're British, you don't get the benefit because you have to deal with all the stuff if you go to Europe. But Ireland is still part of the European Union, but it's also still part of the island union here, like the UK and Britain. I just learned that today.
I need to marry an Irish girl from the Republic of Ireland.
Yeah. Well, then you could just do it's just fun. It's also because there's the signs everywhere. You see them, get ready for Brexit. So I decided to look in, and it just has like a set of questions that you follow. Like, am I Irish, British, living in the UK, living in Europe? Blah, blah. And so it's just, I realized like, dang, I'm Irish. I can both stay in the UK and stay in Europe if I want. So like, it's epic. So if I want to stay here forever, totally good. Anyway. Big benefit because Europe is way less messed up on 5G stuff, but I think it's getting pretty bad too. Anyhow, but people can also, from the US, you could probably get residency, not that hard. But so the light diet, step 8. I mean, you're the master on cultivating your inner light, although I know you've been recording now for all of 8 hours.
10 hours straight.
10 hours straight.
We just hit the 10-hour mark.
Luke's inner light is having fatigue.
I'm just having steak deficiency.
Deficiency. I might have to break the rules this evening. Anyhow.
Actually, what would be bomb, dude, is if we could find some oysters. I'd like to go.
Before my flight, dude,
I'd like to go crush
epic.
like
Tim
30
and them are probably like,
oysters. I've been texting him. He's like, dude, you're insane. I know.
We can't rush.
It's not
magic.
over till it's over, babe.
It's
like
over
Lenny Kravitz said.
All right, so I can say that everyone here, you have the light diet. Like, cultivate your inner light. Like, do your thing. Shine on. Smile. Be happy. Like, I'm no expert in this. Trust me. I've had plenty of, like, mood swings, blah, blah, blah. But this definitely works really well. And there's pieces that aren't included, other protocols and hacks. But, like, mitochondrial health, the work of Dr. Cruz especially, which is amazing and beautiful. This is condensed into these steps. And from my experience, I've added a few things. So this is super, super, super dandy for improving health. And this is what we talked about in the last episode, but like with a lot of just like no structure and less explanation and clarity on how it all works. So I would say I didn't think it was possible to outdo the last episode. I think it's been outdone by orders of magnitude. And
I would say
I
so
wouldn't be
too.
surprised if we can hit number 1 again, but we'll see.
Let's do it.
Share. Oh, now that you're still watching, do me a favor. Do what everyone did last time when this launched. Take a screenshot of the podcast, please. Spotify, everything. Share it on your Instagram story. Tag me at The Light Diet on Instagram. My old handle was like Maddie_M, so it was like way harder to like deal with because 3 underscores. So now you can tag me way easier too, which presumably will help. The Light Diet. And also tag Luke and just share it. Make it super viral. Show it to your friends, especially if they're, rich, famous, important. You remember last night at dinner? See, you were like, the one guy was saying like, oh yeah, I have this friend who's a billionaire who lives in LA, and like when he learns about something interesting like problems or something, he's like, he'll give them money, and Luke's like, oh, I have some problems. It was really well done.
Oh,
anyway,
Jesus, man.
that was really well done.
Matt, answer this one quickly because you've answered it before, but it's my tradition. I don't think I've ever missed this in 220 episodes or whatever.
Not this time.
You've taught me a shitload of crazy stuff today. Who have been
so
3
glad.
teachers or teachings that have influenced your life in any general area that you might recommend our listeners go learn from as well?
That's magnificent. Definitely Dr. Jack Kruse. Goes without saying, as mentioned before. Julius Caesar. He wrote a book called The Conquest of Gaul, in which he describes the conquest of Gaul from the northern Italian border in the Alps, conquering all of Gaul, all the different tribes. I mean, seriously, when I say it's like one of the dopest books I've ever read, it's one of the dopest books I've ever read. It's quite small, but the battles, they had legions. Each legion is like 5,000 men. He had several legions marching with him everywhere, 10,000, 15,000 men. He's a leader in his scarlet robe. They would take weeks just to siege a city, building fortifications around it. And the final battle, when they defeated the Gaul people, and they would always revolt. And what happened was they had not only them trapped by a siege, but they were attacked from the outside by all the rest of the Gallic people. Basically, the French and the British were Gallic to some extent. So they had this donut, basically. They had an inner line sieging the inner city that was trapped and an outer line protecting themselves, and almost got totally toast. But they held strong, and then when they won, because they didn't want them to revolt again, not that this is healthy practice, but, it's why French is Latin and Romans and the Western world is what it is. They cut the hands off of everyone rather than killing them all to show mercy. They cut all their hands off so that the Gallics would never revolt again from Caesar's control. And thus, France became a province. And it was just super dope to read about his crossing of the Channel. I mean, I crossed from Paris for this reason largely on a train under the Channel. I mean, it took them like a year to build the whole fleet, and then they took the whole fleet over, and they're on like an island. They don't know how big it is, a couple legions of men, an island full of people, all of whom want to murder you because they've heard from people traveling regularly that you control all this continent and you basically screw everyone and take hostages and take advantage of them, and which is true. And the Romans did that. And so basically their boats all got beached. He was like, yeah, we didn't really know about these things called tides because we were always in the Mediterranean. So pretty much our entire fleet got beached and destroyed. And we were trapped on a foreign island. We were kind of screwed, but basically we pillaged and screwed them all. And the Romans even founded the city of London here. So it's pretty fascinating. So Julius Caesar, super dope. He's like one of my greatest inspirations ever, not because of cutting people's hands off, but because he's a badass. And the second, and also, like, I'm Italian to some extent, which is why I'm not like 6'5" or whatever like Luke. Probably more like German, maybe not. But so like just shows you the people who are short, because he was apparently kind of short. I'm not that short, but 5'10", 5'9", still can conquer the world and be the leader. So, but that's like I'm like, I empathize with this guy, world domination. And then the other is Ayn Rand. Do you know Ayn Rand?
I've heard the name.
Best. She's a Russian-born woman, and people, you're gonna lose, I'm gonna lose a lot of people from this, just saying this maybe, but basically Russian-born woman, you'll like her a lot. Born just before the Bolshevik revolutions, young woman, and her family owned pharmacies and whatnot, and basically all of everything they worked for really hard was taken away by the Bolsheviks because they thought that basically, how can we say, that people who have and have a lot basically are tyrannical, evil, and they don't deserve it because basically money comes from nowhere, and basically communism, so that like there's no, people who have like the heads of the hospitals that they killed all of them, and the people who own all the land because they farmed really hard and worked really hard, they killed them in the streets, they raped them, they stole all their land, they redistributed the hospital ownership to idiots who didn't have and run the hospitals because they were stupid and they weren't smart enough to do that. Same with the kulaks who the Russians killed because they were the wealthy landowners who worked hard, so they had all this land and farms and they produced all the food supply. So they ended up killing like I think 10 million people by famine, by eliminating the people who actually worked hard and produced their economy, because they didn't realize that, the reason certain people have a lot is because they work hard for it. And anyway, she was inspired. Her family left. Thankfully, all their pharmacy stuff was taken away, or whatever their businesses were. And then she basically became an author about the toxicness of communism and socialism and the major threat.
Like her already.
In the 50s, she published her magnum opus, like her greatest publication, a book called Atlas Shrugged, 1,200-page book that I highly recommend everyone read. Amazing, amazing book. Some people think it's like childish and like, it's like super idealistic. But if you understand the underlying philosophy, it's basically that in order to live, and this is great way to end the whole thing, life isn't free. You have to react hydrogen with oxygen in your mitochondria to stay alive, and you have to forage that yourself. And if someone else forages it for you and you're living off of them foraging it, then you're basically living off of someone else, and you're basically a leech, essentially. And to basically, like, the communist philosophy or the idea is that basically the people who produce, they can just produce infinitely, so you can just tax them like crazy, and the government can make more. Socialism too, and Democrats in the United States. Well, I shouldn't probably say that here, but generally the far left philosophies, yes, believe that you can just tax people like myself who work hard and build their own business. My friends who are in university, this is another thing I've learned about. Like, they're in university and they're like, high taxes, high taxes. And I'm like, you're sitting in school studying some environmental sciences or something that doesn't really, maybe not environmental sciences, but something that isn't correlating to like real life. And basically they're saying like, oh yeah, let's have like more taxes. So basically the people like me who work hard and create value in the world, they're just going to basically live off people who work hard. It's like leeching. That's basically the antithesis of what she's all about. Like, people should work hard. Now, there's lots of caveats and blah, 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 things where, like, there's disabled people who literally can't work. And so maybe there's certain cases, but most people who take welfare, who take money, they're not disabled. They just don't work. And so it is a shame. So she's awesome, epic. And there's, like, most of the big Republicans who I don't necessarily agree with on things, just to be clear with people here. I'm more, like, libertarian and into freedom and so on, just to be clear. But a lot of big Republicans are huge fans of her, even including the ones who led to like the financial crisis, because it was all about capitalism. She's a mega capitalist. Her philosophy is called objectivism. It's basically that the highest moral value is to pursue your own rational self-interest, which means your own self-interest, but not at the expense of others. So, like not hurting people, not stealing, not lying, not cheating, but providing value for the world. And it's just such a beautiful story. I was emotional, in tears at certain points. I mean, 1,200 pages, dude. Insane.
Damn, bro.
But I was reading it. Like, that was probably the best time of my life in the last year, was when I had that book just to go to at any point. It was like exciting to go to. So I probably should reread that or read other of her works and find similar authors. Book suggestions, send them my way. So, yeah, super fascinating. Dr. Cruz, Julius Caesar, and Ayn Rand.
Awesome, dude.
Yeah.
Well, we've gone 3:16. It's 10:10 p.m. Let's officially drop the mic, my friend. Good to see you. Good to hang.
Dude, I didn't think we could outdo it, but seriously, especially with low voltage Luke after all this time, crushed it. So, mic drop.
Let's go find some fresh oysters to crush.
Shine on.